The Imperium of the mid-32nd millennium was not the same entity that had emerged triumphant from the Horus heresy. Nearly 1,500 years had passed since the Emperor was interred upon the Golden Throne, and with each passing century, his vision for humanity became more distorted, twisted into something he would scarcely recognize. By the year 544, the Imperium had devolved into a bureaucratic nightmare, a labyrinthine construct of competing interests and political maneuvering. The High Lords of Terra, those 12 individuals who collectively wielded the Emperor's authority in his absence, had grown accustomed to their power. What had once been positions of solemn duty had transformed into prizes to be coveted and defended. The Grand Master of Assassins, the Master of the Administratum, the Fabricator General of Mars, the Lord Commander Militant of the Imperial Guard, these titles and others represented the pinnacle of imperial authority, and those who held them guarded their prerogatives jealously. Draken Vangorich, the Grand Master of Assassins, was perhaps the most dangerous of them all. A man whose very profession involved the meticulous planning of death, Vangorich maintained a careful network of informants and agents throughout the Sol system. Though he rarely spoke during the High Lord's meetings, his silence carried more weight than the bombastic pronouncements of his colleagues. The other High Lords were right to fear him, for the Officio Assassinorum's reach extended to every corner of the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy had grown tremendously in power since the heresy, transforming from a minor cult into the state religion of the Imperium. Its cardinals and confessors preached the divinity of the Emperor to trillions of citizens, and its influence permeated every aspect of imperial society. The Ecclesiarch Messring was an ambitious man who saw the institution he led as the true heart of the Imperium, more important even than the Adeptus Terra itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus, represented by Fabricator General Cubic, had become increasingly insular. The tech priests of Mars guarded their technological secrets with fanatical devotion, viewing innovation with suspicion and treating the recovery of ancient technology as a sacred duty. The relationship between Terra and Mars had grown strained, with the Mechanicus pursuing its own agenda while still maintaining the pretense of cooperation with the wider Imperium. These divisions and rivalries might have been manageable in peacetime, but the Imperium of 544 was far from peaceful. The Imperial military had never fully recovered from the devastating losses of the heresy. The Imperial Guard consisted of countless regiments drawn from thousands of worlds, but coordination between these forces was often poor, and strategic planning rarely extended beyond the level of individual sectors. The Imperial Navy, too, was stretched thin. Its battle fleets patrolled the shipping lanes between major worlds, but vast swathes of the Imperium received only token protection. Communication between distant systems relied on astropathic messages that could take weeks or months to arrive, if they arrived at all. This fragmentation made rapid response to threats nearly impossible on an Imperium-wide scale. Most concerning was the state of the Adeptus Astartes. The Space Marine legions had been broken down into chapters of approximately 1,000 warriors each, following the dictates of the Codex Astartes. While this reorganization had prevented any single Astartes commander from wielding the power of an entire legion, it had also scattered the Imperium's most elite fighting forces across the galaxy. Each chapter operated largely independently, defending its own territory or pursuing its own campaigns. The Imperial Fists, inheritors of Rogel Dorn's legacy, maintained their vigil over Terra itself. Chapter Master Vornhagen led his warriors with the stern determination characteristic of Dorn's Gene sons. A veteran of countless campaigns, Hagen was respected both for his tactical acumen and for his unwavering loyalty to the throne. Under his leadership, the Imperial Fists continued to train rigorously, preparing for threats that might never materialize in their lifetimes. The chapter's fortress monastery, Phalanx, orbited Terra as it had since the days of the Great Crusade. This massive space station, practically a mobile world in its own right, served as both training ground and last line of defense for the throne world. The Imperial Fists maintained constant combat drills, with companies rotating between deployment to trouble spots across the Segmentum Solar and garrison duty on Phalanx itself. Hagen's Reclusiam, led by Master Haid, preserved the traditions and battle honors of the chapter. The Imperial Fist's history was recorded in painstaking detail, from their founding by Rogel Dorn to their near destruction during the Iron Warrior's revenge attack decades earlier. That catastrophic defeat had forced the chapter to rebuild itself from a handful of survivors, drawing on its successor chapters to replenish its ranks. The memory of that humiliation still burned in the minds of veteran battle brothers. The chapter's organization followed the codex structure meticulously, with 10 companies each specializing in different aspects of warfare. The first company, comprising veteran space marines in Terminator armor, represented the chapter's elite. The second through fifth companies were battle companies, capable of addressing almost any combat situation. The sixth and seventh served as tactical reserves, while the eighth and ninth specialized in assault and devastator operations respectively. The 10th company, as with all codex chapters, consisted of scout marines, new recruits who had not yet earned their full power armor. This rigid adherence to the Codex Astartes would prove both a strength and a weakness in the coming conflict. The Imperial Fists were superbly trained and disciplined, but they lacked the flexibility that their Legion organization had once provided. When faced with a threat of unprecedented scale, these limitations would become painfully apparent. Far from Terra, on the fringes of Imperial space, something ancient and terrible was stirring. The Ork race, long dismissed as a nuisance rather than an existential threat, was undergoing a transformation that few in the Imperium understood or even recognized. Orks are not simply aliens, they are a complex ecosystem unto themselves, created by the ancient beings known as the Old Ones as living weapons against the Necronter. Orks possess genetic memory and an instinctive understanding of technology that belies their brutish appearance. Their society is built around the concept of strength, with the largest and most powerful orks naturally rising to positions of leadership. Under normal circumstances, orks grow throughout their lives, with successful warlords reaching impressive sizes as they win battles and absorb the latent psychic energy generated by their victories. This process is self-limiting in most cases, as larger orks eventually fall to challengers or enemy action before they can reach truly monstrous proportions. But occasionally, when conditions are right, something different occurs. If an ork population reaches sufficient density and remains united under strong leadership for an extended period, the growth process accelerates. The dominant orks develop not just physically, but intellectually, retaining more of the genetic knowledge encoded in their DNA. Their technological capabilities advance rapidly, moving beyond the crude but effective devices typical of ork society to more sophisticated systems that rival or even surpass Imperial technology. This was precisely what was happening in the Galactic East, centered around the historic world of Ullanor, once the site of the Imperium's greatest triumph against the Greenskins, where the Emperor himself had honored Horus before the assembled might of the Great Crusade. Ullanor had been cleansed of ork presence, or so the Imperial records claimed. In truth, spores had remained, dormant for centuries before beginning the slow process of re-establishing an ork presence on the world. By 544, that presence had grown into something unprecedented. The ork leader who would come to be known simply as the Beast had emerged, a creature of terrifying proportions both physically and intellectually. Standing several times the height of even the largest, normal ork warbosses, the Beast possessed not just brute strength, but genuine strategic intelligence. Under his rule, ork society had stratified into specialized castes in a manner never before documented by Imperial xenobiologists. The most visible of these new subspecies were the Beast-class orks, massive creatures that served as sub-commanders in the Beast's armies. Each was a formidable warlord in its own right, capable of coordinating complex military operations and adapting to changing battlefield conditions. Unlike typical ork warbosses, who led primarily through intimidation and personal combat prowess, Beast-class orks demonstrated genuine tactical acumen. Supporting these commanders were specialized ork types that fulfilled specific military and societal functions. Engineer orks displayed an intuitive understanding of technology that went far beyond the usual mechbo knowledge, creating weapons and vehicles that operated with surprising reliability and efficiency. Diga orks specialized in tunneling and fortification, allowing the Greenskins to establish heavily defended positions with remarkable speed. Psyker orcs, rare in normal greenskin society, appeared with greater frequency, their powers amplified by the psychic resonance of the massive orc population. Most alarming was the technological advancement that accompanied this biological evolution. Traditional orc technology, while effective, had always been crude, vehicles cobbled together from scavenged parts, weapons that seemed more likely to kill their wielders than their targets. The technology of the beast's empire was different. It retained the distinctive orcish aesthetic, all hard angles and brutal functionality, but it worked with a precision and reliability that shocked Imperial observers. The most dramatic example of this technological leap was the creation of the attack moons. These were not simply spacecraft, but mobile battle stations, artificial planetoids bristling with weapons capable of devastating entire star systems. Each attack moon contained gravity generators that could tear apart planetary bodies, along with teleportation systems that allowed the orcs to deploy forces directly onto target worlds without the need for landing craft. The first sign that something was amiss came from the frontier worlds of Segmentum Pacificus. Astropathic communications from several outlying systems simply ceased without warning. In itself, this was not unusual. Warp storms, equipment failures, and local conflicts frequently disrupted the Imperium's fragile communication network. But the pattern of these silences was troubling. They radiated outward from a central point, suggesting a coordinated attack rather than random incidents. Imperial authorities initially suspected chaos activity, perhaps a warband of traitor Astartes raiding isolated worlds. Several small battle groups were dispatched to investigate, with orders to re-establish communication and eliminate any heretical presence. None returned, and their own astropathic communications cut off abruptly after reporting contact with unusual Xenos constructs in several systems. The first confirmed encounter with an attack moon occurred in the Artemantua system. The Imperial colony there was small but strategically valuable, with extensive mining operations that supplied raw materials to forge worlds throughout the surrounding sector. When communication with Artemantua ceased, the local battle fleet commander dispatched a reconnaissance squadron to investigate. What they found defied comprehension. Hanging in orbit around Artemantua was what appeared to be a small moon, except that no such natural satellite had existed in the system before. As the Imperial ships approached, the moon revealed itself as an artificial construct of staggering proportions. Before the squadron could retreat or even send a warning, the attack moon opened fire, its weapons tearing through void shields and armored hulls with contemptuous ease. A single vessel, the light cruiser Argus, managed to escape the destruction of its squadron mates. Its astropathic choir, driven half-mad by what they had witnessed, sent a fragmented message back to the sector capital before the ship's warp engines catastrophically failed during its emergency jump. The message, incomplete and corrupted, nonetheless conveyed the essential horror. The orcs had returned, and they had weapons capable of destroying worlds. Similar reports began to filter in from other sectors within Segmentum Pacificus. Imperial officials, accustomed to dismissing greenskin threats as localized problems, struggled to comprehend the scale of what was happening. The High Lords of Terra, absorbed in their political maneuvering, initially paid little attention to these disturbing reports from the galactic fringe. It would take a more direct threat to shake them from their complacency. That threat arrived in the form of an attack moon that materialized near the phalanx itself, its sudden appearance catching even the vigilant Imperial fists by surprise. The orcs had not just returned, they had evolved into something far more dangerous than the Imperium had ever faced before, and they were coming for Terra. The Artemantua system had always been unremarkable by Imperial standards. A modestly productive mining colony, it exported ferrous ores and rare minerals to nearby forge worlds, maintaining a population of several million indentured workers and their overseers. Located in the Segmentum Solar's outer reaches, it was far enough from Terra to be considered a frontier world, yet close enough to benefit from regular naval patrols and administrative oversight. None of this protected it when the attack moon materialized in system. The first indication of trouble came when automated distress beacons activated throughout the system. Standard Imperial protocol required such measures only in the most dire circumstances, planetary invasion, widespread rebellion, or catastrophic natural disaster. When 3 separate beacons triggered simultaneously, the nearby naval picket ship Dauntless Regard diverted to investigate. Captain Jenin Korosov, a 30-year veteran of the Imperial Navy, approached the system with appropriate caution. His auger arrays detected unusual gravitational disturbances throughout the Artemantua system, fluctuations that defied standard explanation. As the Dauntless Regard translated into real space at the system's edge, Korosov ordered full combat readiness. What greeted the Imperial vessel was beyond anything its crew had prepared for. Hanging in orbit around Artemantua Prime was a structure of impossible proportions, a planetoid that dwarfed the mining world below it. The construct's surface bristled with crude but massive weapons emplacements, launch bays, and what appeared to be enormous power generators. Most disturbing was the unmistakable Orkish aesthetic of the construction, the jagged, brutal architecture that somehow functioned despite appearing cobbled together from scrap. The attack moon's response was immediate and devastating. Gravitational weapons, technology thought impossible by Imperial science, lashed out at the Dauntless Regard, creating localized distortions that twisted the ship's hull like paper. Secondary batteries fired projectiles that seemed to phase in and out of reality, bypassing void shields entirely. The Imperial vessel managed to launch a single astropathic message before it was torn apart, its reactor core detonating in a brief, futile flash against the void. That message reached Terra 3 days later, garbled and fragmented, but clear enough in its urgency that even the hidebound bureaucracy of the Adeptus Terra could not ignore it. The High Lords convened in emergency session, a rare occurrence in an institution where scheduled meetings might be planned years in advance. Lord Commander Militant Lansung of the Astra Militarum dominated the proceedings. A career officer who had risen through political acumen rather than battlefield prowess, Lansung dismissed the threat with characteristic arrogance. Greenskins, he declared to his fellow High Lords, are a nuisance, not an existential threat. We have crushed them countless times before. This talk of attack moons is clearly exaggeration from panicked observers. I propose a measured response, a battle group to secure Artemantua and restore Imperial order. Fabricator General Kubik of the Adeptus Mechanicus disagreed, his vox-modulated voice carrying an unusual edge of concern. The gravitational technology described in the astropathic message violated known physical principles. Such capability in Orkish hands represented a paradigm shift that could not be dismissed. Draken Vangorich, Grand Master of Assassins, remained characteristically silent throughout much of the debate, but his cold eyes missed nothing. The political maneuvering was already beginning, Lansung seeing an opportunity to expand his military authority, Kubik concerned about technological threats to Mechanicus supremacy, Ecclesiarch Messring preparing to frame the conflict in religious terms. The debate might have continued indefinitely had not Chapter Master Vorn Hagen of the Imperial Fists intervened. Though not officially a High Lord, the Master of the Imperial Fists commanded respect even in this assembly. I will lead a force to Artemantua myself, Hagen stated. The Imperial Fists stand ready, as always, to defend the Imperium. We shall assess this threat firsthand and respond accordingly. His declaration broke the deadlock. The High Lords, eager to defer responsibility, unanimously approved the deployment of the Imperial Fists to Artemantua. Lansung, unwilling to be completely sidelined, committed a small Imperial Guard battle group to support the Space Marines. The Fabricator General promised technical support from a Mechanicus exploitation team, eager to study any recovered Ork technology. Within days, a strike force departed Terra. Chapter Master Hagen led 600 Imperial Fists, most of the chapter's fighting strength, aboard the Phalanx. The massive star fort, capable of destroying planets, seemed appropriate firepower for dealing with the reported Ork construct. Supporting the Astartes were 3 regiments of Imperial Guard and a Mechanicus contingent aboard their own vessels. What awaited them at Artemantua defied Imperial tactical doctrine. The attack moon had positioned itself in high orbit, surrounded by a swarm of smaller craft that followed no recognizable pattern of movement. As the Imperial fleet approached, auger readings detected energy spikes throughout the Ork construct. Hagen deployed his forces according to Codex Astartes principles. The Imperial Fists would spearhead a direct assault on the attack moon, targeting what appeared to be command structures on its surface. Meanwhile, the Imperial Guard would secure the mining colony below, which had fallen ominously silent. The first hint that something was terribly wrong came when the Orks launched their counterattack. Rather than the disorganized swarm tactics typical of greenskin warfare, the Ork vessels moved with coordinated precision. They concentrated fire on specific Imperial ships, targeting engines and command bridges with uncanny accuracy. More shocking was the sudden appearance of Ork forces throughout the Imperial formation. One moment, the void between vessels was empty. The next, Ork attack craft and boarding torpedoes materialized as if from nowhere. The Mechanicus representatives recognized the technology immediately, teleportation devices, but operating at a scale and efficiency that even the Adeptus Mechanicus could not achieve. These teleporta platforms, as they would later be designated in Imperial records, bypassed defensive screens entirely. Ork boarding parties appeared directly within Imperial vessels, including the phalanx itself. The Imperial Fists responded with characteristic discipline, sealing bulkheads and deploying rapid response teams, but the suddenness of the assault created momentary chaos throughout the fleet. On the surface of Artamantua, the Imperial Guard regiments encountered their own nightmare. The mining colony's population had been completely eliminated, replaced by extensive Ork fortifications that stretched across the planet's surface. Massive artillery pieces, many larger than Imperial Titans, bombarded the landing zones, while networks of tunnels allowed Ork forces to appear seemingly from nowhere to ambush Imperial positions. The most terrifying development came when the first Gargants emerged from concealed hangars. These massive war machines had been encountered before in Imperial campaigns against the Orks, but never with the sophistication displayed at Artamantua. The Gargants advanced surrounded by crackling energy fields, void shields, technology previously associated only with Imperial Titans and capital ships. Lasguns and even battle cannon shells dissipated harmlessly against these barriers, while the Gargants' own weapons wreaked havoc among Imperial formations. Chapter Master Hagen, recognizing the deteriorating situation, ordered a change in strategy. The Imperial Fists would concentrate their assault on a single section of the attack moon, aiming to penetrate to its core and destroy it from within. This desperate gambit required the commitment of nearly all the chapter's Terminator armored veterans, led by Hagen himself. The teleportation assault initially appeared successful. The Imperial Fists materialized within what seemed to be a central chamber of the attack moon, a vast space filled with crude but effective Orkish technology. The Space Marines formed a defensive perimeter and began planting melta charges at key structural points. Then the beast's elite guards attacked. These were not ordinary Orks, but massive creatures standing 3 times the height of a Space Marine, their green skin thick enough to deflect bolter rounds, their crude armor incorporating technology that rivaled Astartes' power suits. They wielded weapons that fired gravitational distortion fields, imploding Terminator armor with the warriors still inside. Chapter Master Hagen and his command squad found themselves confronted by a beast-class Ork, a sub-commander of terrifying proportions. The creature's tactical acumen matched its physical power. It anticipated the Imperial Fists' maneuvers, countering their coordinated attacks with brutal efficiency. In the confined space of the attack moon's interior, the Space Marines' discipline counted for little against the beast's overwhelming strength. The battle reached its climax when Hagen engaged the beast-class Ork directly. The Chapter Master's power fist struck with enough force to shatter granite, but the Ork's armor absorbed the impact. The creature's counter-attack caught Hagen across his torso, crushing his breastplate and the enhanced physiology beneath. As the Chapter Master fell, the Imperial Fist's morale wavered for the first time. Corland, a veteran sergeant of the 3rd Company, assumed command. Known as the Slaughter for his grim efficiency in combat, Corland ordered an immediate withdrawal. The surviving Terminators gathered their wounded and dead, including the grievously injured Chapter Master, and teleported back to the Phalanx. By this point, the Imperial fleet was in disarray. 3 guard transports had been destroyed, their troops still aboard. A Mechanicus explorator vessel had been captured intact, its tech priests dragged away for purposes unknown. The phalanx itself, while still operational, had suffered damage to multiple decks from Ork boarding parties. Courland made the hardest decision of his life. With Chapter Master Hagen dying and nearly half the Imperial fists already lost, he ordered a retreat from the Ardamantua system. The surviving Imperial forces disengaged, using short warp jumps to break contact with the pursuing Ork vessels. The journey back to Terra was a somber one. Chapter Master Hagen succumbed to his wounds despite the best efforts of the Apothecarian. One by one, other wounded battle brothers followed their leader into death, their enhanced physiology unable to cope with the strange energies of the Ork weapons. By the time the phalanx reached Terra, the Imperial fists had lost over 400 battle brothers, more than 2/3 of the force that had departed so confidently days before. The losses continued even after their return. Some wounded died on the operating tables. Others, exposed to unknown Ork bioweapons, deteriorated despite intensive treatment. When the final tally was calculated, a terrible truth emerged. Of the once proud Imperial Fists chapter, only a single battle brother remained alive, Courland himself. The last son of Dorn, as he would come to be known, stood before the High Lords of Terra with his chapter reduced to a single warrior. His armor still bore the scars of Ardamantua, his face haggard with grief and rage. The High Lords, accustomed to political maneuvering and bureaucratic delays, fell silent before Courland's stark presence. "The beast comes," Courland told them, his voice hoarse from shouting orders that no longer had recipients, "and the Imperium is not ready." Lord Commander Lansung attempted to dismiss the defeat as a tactical setback, suggesting that proper Imperial Guard deployment would have yielded different results. Courland silenced him with a single armored gauntlet slammed onto the council table. The Fabricator General, for once setting aside Mechanicus secrecy, shared the preliminary analysis of the attack moon's technology. The gravitational weapons operated on principles that violated known physical laws. The teleportation systems functioned with an efficiency that Mars had never achieved. Most disturbing was the evidence that the attack moon itself was not unique. The Mechanicus had detected energy signatures suggesting multiple such constructs throughout nearby systems. As the High Lords argued over jurisdiction and response protocols, Courland stood silent, the last living embodiment of Rogel Dorn's legacy. The Imperial Fists, the Praetorians of Terra, had been reduced to a memory. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Terra's light, more attack moons were appearing, their trajectories converging on the heart of the Imperium. The technological marvel that was an attack moon defied Imperial classification systems. More than mere spacecraft, yet not quite artificial planets, these massive constructs represented an evolutionary leap in Orkish engineering that terrified even the most stolid tech priests of Mars. Each attack moon measured approximately 1,200 kilometers in diameter, large enough to generate its own gravitational field, yet small enough to maneuver through the void with surprising agility. Archmagos Cubic, upon reviewing the fragmentary data recovered from Ardamantua, estimated that each attack moon required resources equivalent to stripping dozens of worlds bare. The outer shell consisted of compressed asteroidal material reinforced with adamantium-equivalent alloys. Beneath this protective layer lay a honeycomb of chambers, tunnels, and vast internal spaces that housed millions of Orks in specialized habitation zones. The most distinctive feature of these constructs was their gravitational manipulation technology. At the core of each attack moon sat a central power source that Mechanicus adepts termed a gravitic singularity engine. This technology, impossible by Imperial scientific understanding, generated controlled gravitational fields that could be weaponized with devastating effect. The engines could project focused gravitational waves capable of tearing apart capital ships or creating localized distortions that crushed ground forces into paste. More alarming was the attack moon's propulsion system. Rather than conventional drives, they employed what appeared to be controlled gravitational slingshotting, manipulating space-time to fall toward their destinations. This method allowed them to approach targets without the telltale radiation signatures of plasma engines, often appearing in system with minimal warning. The energy requirements for such technology should have been prohibitive, yet somehow the Orks had solved power generation challenges that had stumped Imperial scientists for millennia. The defensive capabilities of attack moons proved equally formidable. Their outer shells incorporated void shield technology, adapted to cover surface areas far beyond what Imperial engineering could achieve. These shields operated in overlapping sections, allowing the Orks to selectively lower barriers to launch attacks while maintaining protection elsewhere. The sheer power required to sustain such defenses suggested energy production methods unknown to the Imperium. Weapons emplacements covered the attack moon's surfaces in seemingly haphazard arrangements that nonetheless provided overlapping fields of fire in all directions. These included gravity weapons, massive artillery pieces capable of launching projectiles at near relativistic speeds, and energy weapons that fired beams of unknown composition that bypassed conventional shields. Most troubling were the teleportation arrays, teleportas in Orkish parlance, that could transport entire assault forces directly onto enemy vessels or planetary surfaces. The interior organization of attack moons reflected the increasingly sophisticated Orkish society under the beast's rule. Unlike the chaotic layouts typical of Ork constructions, attack moons featured distinct zones for specific functions. Manufacturing districts where enslaved populations produced weapons and equipment, power generation sectors surrounding the central gravitic core, and military staging areas where gargants and other war machines stood ready for deployment. The Proximo system was the first to experience the full devastating potential of an attack moon after Artemantua. Located in the galactic west of Segmentum Solar, Proximo contained 3 inhabited worlds: Proximo Prime, an agri-world that supplied food to neighboring systems; Proximo Secundus, a modest hive world with a population of approximately 8 billion, and Proximo Tertius, a mining colony rich in rare minerals. The attack moon materialized without warning in high orbit around Proximo Secundus. System defense monitors detected a momentary gravitational anomaly, followed by the appearance of what initially registered as a small planetoid. Before the planetary defense forces could even sound general alerts, the attack moon unleashed its first attack. Rather than conventional bombardment, the attack moon projected a focused gravitational field toward Proximo Secundus. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Tectonic plates shifted violently as the planet's crust buckled under the gravitational stress. Hive spires that had stood for millennia collapsed, crushing millions beneath their weight. Oceans surged into new configurations, creating tsunamis that swept away coastal settlements. The death toll in the first hour exceeded 1 billion. The system's defense fleet, consisting of 3 light cruisers and their escort squadrons, responded with admirable speed but tragic ineffectiveness. As they approached attack range, the vessels encountered localized gravitational distortions that threw them off course, disrupting formation and causing several collisions among the smaller escorts. The attack moon's surface batteries opened fire, targeting the disorganized Imperial ships with precision that belied the Orks' reputation for inaccuracy. Fleet Commander Aldo Jurgen of the Light Cruiser Emperor's Wrath attempted to coordinate a concentrated lance strike against what appeared to be a command section of the attack moon. His vessel managed to penetrate the outer void shields and score a direct hit on the Orkish construct, the only successful Imperial strike of the engagement. The damage appeared minimal, merely cratering a small section of the attack moon's surface. The greenskin response was immediate and overwhelming. A gravitational pulse emanated from the attack moon, catching the Emperor's Wrath at its epicenter. The ship's void shields collapsed instantly as the gravitational forces compressed the vessel's midsection. Hull plates buckled, internal decks collapsed into one another, and the reactor containment failed catastrophically. The resulting explosion claimed not only the Emperor's Wrath, but 2 nearby escorts caught in the blast radius. The remaining Imperial vessels attempted to withdraw, but the attack moon launched swarms of attack craft that pursued the retreating ships. These were not the crude Orkish fighters familiar to Imperial naval officers, but sleek, purpose-built interceptors that displayed both speed and maneuverability, matching Imperial equivalents. Most disturbing was their apparent ability to predict Imperial evasive maneuvers, suggesting either sophisticated tactical analysis or, more troublingly, some form of augmented Orkish intelligence. Within 6 hours of the attack moon's arrival, the Proximo defense fleet had been annihilated. Proximo Secundus lay in ruins, its surviving population fleeing to underground shelters that offered little protection against the continuing gravitational attacks. The Orks then turned their attention to Proximo Prime, using a different approach that demonstrated tactical flexibility previously unassociated with greenskin forces. Rather than gravitational weapons, the attack moon deployed landing craft to Proximo Prime's surface. These were not the crude, ramshackle transports typical of Ork invasions, but specialized assault vessels that bypassed orbital defenses through a combination of speed, electronic countermeasures, and limited teleportation technology. They delivered not wild hordes of Ork boys, but organized strike teams led by massive Orks in sophisticated armor. These beast-class commanders directed their forces with tactical precision, targeting power stations, communication hubs, and defensive emplacements in coordinated attacks that paralyzed resistance before it could organize. Within 12 hours, Proximo Prime's planetary governor surrendered unconditionally, hoping to spare the civilian population. The Orks accepted the surrender, then systematically executed every governmental official before herding the remaining population into massive processing centers. The purpose of these centers became apparent when the first slave transports departed for the attack moon. The Orks were not simply conquering, they were harvesting. Humans were sorted by physical capability and technical knowledge, with the strongest sent to labor camps and the most skilled redirected to workshops where they were forced to produce components for Orkish war machines. Those deemed unsuitable for either purpose faced immediate execution, their bodies processed into the biological recycling systems that helped sustain the attack moon's internal ecosystem. Astropathic distress calls from Proximo reached the nearest battle fleet concentration at Pernicus Station 3 days after the attack moon's arrival. Admiral Lansung assembled a response force consisting of 2 battleships, 6 cruisers, and their attendant escort squadrons. This substantial fleet translated into the Proximo system 5 days later, by which time the attack moon had already stripped Proximo Prime of usable resources and begun preliminary bombardment of Proximo Tertius. Admiral Lansung, determined to avenge the earlier Imperial defeat, deployed his fleet in Codex-approved Battle Formation Alpha Tertius, a spearhead configuration with the battleships Divine Imperative and Righteous Fury at its center, supported by cruiser wings on each flank. The formation advanced at combat speed toward the attack moon, which had positioned itself in high orbit around Proximo Tertius. Lansung expected the Orks to respond with their gravitational weapons, planning to scatter his formation at the first sign of such attacks to minimize casualties before regrouping for a concentrated strike. Instead, the attack moon went dark, powering down visible weapons emplacements and external lighting. For several tense minutes, the Imperial fleet continued its approach, auger arrays scanning for any sign of activity. The trap was sprung when the Imperial fleet reached optimal lance range. Not one but dozens of smaller Ork vessels suddenly appeared throughout the Imperial formation, having lain dormant using some form of advanced concealment technology. These were not attack craft, but mid-sized vessels, equivalent to Imperial frigates, each bristling with boarding torpedoes and short-range weapons. Simultaneously, the attack moon's teleportation arrays activated, depositing Ork boarding parties directly onto the bridges and engine rooms of several Imperial vessels. The battleship Righteous Fury found its command deck overrun within seconds, its captain and senior officers slaughtered before they could organize resistance. The Divine Imperative fared marginally better, its bridge crew managing to seal bulkheads and contain the initial boarding action, but secondary teleportations bypassed these defenses entirely. Admiral Lansung, witnessing the disintegration of his command structure, ordered an emergency withdrawal. Only 3 cruisers and 7 escorts managed to disengage successfully. The remaining vessels were either destroyed outright or captured by Ork boarding parties. The Divine Imperative, its engines disabled by precision strikes, drifted helplessly as Ork forces methodically cleared it deck by deck. The last Vox transmission from the battleship, contained only the sounds of bolter fire and the admiral's final order to scuttle the vessel, an order that apparently went unheeded, as the ship was later observed being towed toward the attack moon, presumably for salvage. The Proximo disaster forced even the most skeptical Imperial authorities to acknowledge the unprecedented nature of the Ork threat. Archmagos Cubic convened an emergency conclave of Mechanicus representatives to analyze the fragmentary data recovered from both Artemantua and Proximo. His findings shook the foundations of Imperial understanding regarding Ork capabilities. "We have fundamentally misunderstood the greenskin race," Cubic's report stated bluntly. "The creatures we face are not the disorganized savages of historical record, but an engineered species expressing previously dormant capabilities. The technology they now wield suggests not innovation but recollection, as if they are remembering knowledge encoded in their very biology." Cubic's theory posited that Orks contain genetic memory, accessible only under specific conditions of population density and leadership. The beast, whatever its true nature, had somehow triggered this latent knowledge, allowing the greenskins to produce technology that rivaled or exceeded Imperial capabilities in several critical areas. Most disturbing was Cubic's analysis of the attack moons themselves. Based on gravitational studies and orbital mechanics, he estimated that constructing a single such entity would require resources equivalent to stripping dozens of star systems bare. The implications were clear. The Ork Empire responsible for these constructs must control territory far more extensive than previously believed, operating beyond Imperial detection for decades or even centuries. The Fabricator General's warnings went largely unheeded by the High Lords, who remained absorbed in political maneuvering even as reports of additional attack moons reached Terra. Vangorich, the Grand Master of Assassins, took more concrete action, dispatching Execution Force Kappa to gather intelligence on the attack moon's capabilities. None of the assassins returned, their fate unknown. Then came the event that finally shattered Imperial complacency. On the 224th day of the year 544, Terra's orbital monitoring stations detected a massive gravitational anomaly in the outer system. Before defensive protocols could even be initiated, an attack moon materialized in high orbit around humanity's birthworld itself. The construct dwarfed even the massive orbital plates and defense platforms that had guarded Terra since the days of the Horus Heresy. Positioned itself carefully maintaining geosynchronous orbit above the Himalayan mountains where the Imperial Palace stood. For several hours it remained dormant, as if studying the defenses arrayed against it or perhaps savoring the moment. When the attack moon finally acted, it was not with the devastating gravitational weapons used at Proximo, but with something far more precise. A single focused beam lanced downward, striking the outer precincts of the Imperial Palace with surgical accuracy. The beam cut through void shields and adamantium reinforcement alike, boring a perfect cylinder through multiple defensive layers before terminating in a massive chamber deep within the palace complex. The chamber it struck was not chosen randomly. The beam had penetrated directly into the Hall of Victories, where trophies from the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy stood as testaments to Imperial triumph. Among these relics was a massive banner, the very standard that the Emperor himself had planted on Ullanor after the defeat of the Ork Empire there, 10,000 years earlier. The message could not have been clearer had it been spoken aloud. The beast had returned to reclaim what was once taken from the Orks, and Terra itself was not beyond its reach. The Last Wall Protocol was perhaps Rogel Dorn's most prescient contingency plan, created in the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, when the Primarch reluctantly implemented the dictates of the Codex Astartes. While Dorn had initially resisted Guilliman's reforms, he eventually recognized the political necessity of dividing his legion. However, he refused to leave Terra completely undefended in the event of another catastrophic assault. The protocol itself was elegantly simple in concept, yet complex in execution. Should Terra face an existential threat beyond the capability of the Imperial fists alone, the chapter would activate emergency astropathic beacons carrying specialized encryption keys known only to the successors of Dorn's gene line. Upon receiving this signal, all successor chapters were oath-bound to set aside their individual missions and reunite under a single banner, effectively reconstituting the Imperial Fist's legion for the duration of the crisis. For 1,500 years, the protocol had remained dormant, its details preserved in heavily encrypted data vaults within each successor chapter's fortress monastery. Many younger battle brothers knew of it only as a theoretical exercise, a relic from the uncertain days following the Emperor's internment. Now, with the Imperial Fists reduced to a single battle brother and Terra directly threatened, Courland faced the grim necessity of activating Dorne's final safeguard. The astropathic chamber within the phalanx felt cavernously empty as Courland entered, his armored footfalls echoing off ancient walls that had once witnessed the deliberations of his Primarch. The Imperial Fist's chief astropath, Wienand, awaited him, her blind eyes somehow still conveying the gravity of the moment. The activation process required Courland's genetic verification, a drop of his blood containing the precious gene seed legacy of Dorne, applied to a specialized reader built into the chamber's central console. As the device confirmed his identity, sealed compartments within the console slid open, revealing crystalline data cores untouched since the days of the Legion's dissolution. Wienand and her astropathic choir began the painstaking process of translating these encoded commands into the psychic wavelengths that would carry them through the warp. The message was brief but unmistakable to those for whom it was intended. The palace stands undefended. The last wall must rise. Throughout the segmentum, the successors of Dorne received the call with varying degrees of surprise and solemnity. The Crimson Fists, led by Chapter Master Oberkin, were the first to acknowledge the signal. Having recently suffered devastating losses during the Ork assault on Rin's world, they understood all too well the existential threat posed by evolved greenskin forces. Despite their reduced numbers, barely 400 battle brothers remained. Oberkin immediately ordered all companies to disengage from current operations and make for Terra with all possible speed. The response from the Black Templars proved more complicated. High Marshal Bohemond, commanding the largest of Dorne's successor chapters thanks to their unique interpretation of the Codex Astartes, received the signal while overseeing a crusade against Xeno's forces in the Galactic East. Bohemond's initial reaction was skepticism bordering on outright refusal. The Black Templars had developed their own traditions over the centuries, embracing a zealous interpretation of the Imperial Creed that sometimes put them at odds with their more stoic progenitor chapter. Bohemond viewed the Last Wall Protocol as potentially compromising the chapter's independence, a regression to organizational structures that the Emperor himself had ultimately rejected through the implementation of the Codex. More pragmatically, Bohemond questioned the strategic wisdom of concentrating all of Dorne's gene sons in one location, even one as vital as Terra. Such concentration left other critical sectors vulnerable and contradicted the fundamental purpose of the chapter system, ensuring that no single military commander could again threaten the Imperium as Horus had done. The Fist's exemplar, under Chapter Master Maximus Thane, responded with characteristic pragmatism. Operating from their fortress monastery in the Ghoul Stars, the exemplar had maintained the closest doctrinal adherence to Imperial Fist's traditions among all successor chapters. Thane immediately recognized the severity of a situation that would prompt activation of the protocol and began methodical preparations for what would likely be the greatest mobilization in the chapter's history. The excoriators, led by Chapter Master Zachariah Kirsch, received the signal while engaged in defensive operations along the Damocles Gulf. Kirsch, who had assumed command following the previous chapter master's death during the Colarcost Blood Crusade, faced a difficult decision. The Tau expansion sphere threatened several key Imperial worlds, and withdrawing excoriator forces might doom these populations. Nevertheless, the protocol's activation superseded all other considerations. Kirsch ordered an immediate withdrawal, leaving behind only the barest skeleton forces to cover their departure. Other, lesser-known successors responded according to their capabilities and proximity. The Sons of the Phoenix diverted their fleet from scheduled resupply operations. The Iron Knights abandoned ongoing compliance actions against rebellious planetary governors. The Fire Lords, specialists in siege warfare, began loading their substantial artillery trains aboard chapter vessels. Coordinating this massive convergence of forces presented logistical challenges unprecedented since the days of the Great Crusade. Courland, working with what remained of the Imperial Fist's command structure, established a secure Vox network using the Phalanx's powerful communication arrays. Designated representatives from each successor chapter were assigned coordination frequencies, creating a rudimentary command structure that would eventually evolve into the Last Wall Council. The greatest immediate challenge came from the Black Templars' continued reluctance. Bohemond sent his senior castellan, Arnulf, to Terra as his representative, while the High Marshal himself remained with the chapter's main crusade force. This half-measure threatened the protocol's effectiveness, as the Black Templars constituted nearly half of all available Dorn-descended Astartes. Without their full commitment, the reconstituted legion would lack critical mass. Courland recognized that theoretical authority would not sway Bohemond. The High Marshal respected strength and conviction above all else. Rather than continue fruitless negotiations via astropathic message, Courland made the unprecedented decision to leave Terra despite the looming Ork threat. Taking a fast-strike cruiser, he set course for Bohemond's position, determined to personally convince the Black Templar leader of the protocol's necessity. Their meeting occurred aboard the Black Templars' flagship, Eternal Crusader. Bohemond received Courland with formal courtesy but obvious reservation. The High Marshal towered over the Imperial Fist, his armor adorned with crusade badges and purity seals accumulated over centuries of warfare. Behind him stood his command cadre, each warrior a veteran of dozens of campaigns, their collective experience representing thousands of years of combat against the Emperor's enemies. Courland spoke not of duty or ancient oaths, but of practical reality. He described in clinical detail the attack moon that now orbited Terra, its gravitational weapons capable of reducing the throne world to rubble. He recounted the obliteration of the Imperial Fists, warriors no less skilled or dedicated than the Black Templars, in a single engagement. Most critically, he outlined intelligence suggesting that the attack moon above Terra was merely one of dozens, perhaps hundreds, deployed throughout the Imperium. Bohemond's objections gradually shifted from ideological to tactical. If the situation was truly as dire as Courland described, would concentrating forces at Terra not simply provide the Orks with an opportunity to destroy all of Dorn's successors in a single stroke? Would the last wall not become a final tomb? Courland acknowledged the risk, but countered with the fundamental truth that had guided Imperial strategy since the heresy: Terra must not fall. Whatever the cost, whatever the sacrifice required, the throne world represented not just the administrative center of the Imperium, but its spiritual heart. The Emperor's physical form remained there, and with it, the astronomicon that made warp travel possible. If Terra fell, humanity fell with it. After 3 days of intense deliberation, Bohemond relented. The Black Templars would honor the Last Wall Protocol, not out of blind obedience to ancient directives, but from recognition of the existential threat facing the Imperium. The High Marshal issued new orders to all Crusade fleets: disengage, consolidate, and make for Terra with all possible speed. As the successor chapters converged on the Sol system, new challenges emerged. Centuries of independent operation had led to significant divergence in combat doctrine, equipment standardization, and even basic tactical terminology. The Black Templars favored aggressive shock assaults, while the Fists exemplar emphasized methodical siege warfare. The Crimson Fists had developed specialized anti-Ork tactics following their experiences on Rin's world, approaches that sometimes contradicted the methods employed by other successors. Courland recognized that simply gathering these disparate forces in one location would not create an effective fighting force. The Last Wall needed structure, a unified command hierarchy that respected each chapter's traditions while ensuring coordinated action. Drawing on historical records from the Great Crusade era, he established a system of rotating command responsibilities, with chapter masters serving as legion officers according to their specific expertise. Supply chains presented another critical concern. Each chapter maintained its own forge facilities, ammunition specifications, and equipment preferences. The Phalanx's substantial manufacturing capabilities were pressed into service, producing standardized bolter rounds, power pack rechargers, and replacement armor components compatible with all variants of Astartes equipment. Techmarine conclaves worked around the clock to establish interoperability protocols between different marks of power armor and weapon systems. Communication systems required similar standardization. The Black Templars used a modified battle cant derived from ancient Inuit dialects, while the Excoriators employed a compressed Vox code optimized for void warfare. Courland implemented a simplified command language based on original Imperial Fists Legion protocols, requiring officers from all chapters to achieve basic proficiency before integration into joint operations. As these logistical hurdles were gradually overcome, Courland turned his attention to strategic planning. The attack moon remained in high orbit above Terra, seemingly content to observe Imperial preparations without further hostile action. This apparent passivity concerned Courland more than immediate aggression would have. It suggested confidence, perhaps even amusement, on the part of the Ork leadership. Intelligence gathered by Mechanicus survey vessels indicated that the attack moon was maintaining communication with other similar constructs throughout the segmentum. Intercepted transmission fragments, though largely indecipherable, suggested coordinated movement patterns consistent with an encirclement strategy. The beast was not merely attacking the Imperium, it was implementing a sophisticated campaign plan designed to isolate and neutralize humanity's core worlds. The first gathering of the Last Wall Council occurred within the Stratagem of the Phalanx, 37 days after the protocol's activation. Chapter masters and senior representatives from all successor chapters stood around a massive hololithic display showing Terra, the attack moon, and known Ork fleet movements throughout neighboring systems. The gathered warriors represented the greatest concentration of Dorn's gene line since the Legion's dissolution, over 6,000 Astartes in total, though still far short of the Imperial Fists Legion at its height. Courland opened the council with a stark assessment. Conventional military approaches would not suffice against the attack moons. Even the combined firepower of all assembled chapters, supplemented by Imperial Navy battle groups, lacked the raw destructive capacity to overcome the Ork construct's defensive systems. New strategies would be required, approaches that targeted the attack moon's critical vulnerabilities rather than attempting to overwhelm their strengths. The Council's deliberations continued for 3 days, with tactical simulations and strategic projections occupying much of the discussion. Gradually, a consensus emerged. The Last Wall would not merely defend Terra, but would take the fight directly to the beast itself. Only by decapitating the Ork leadership could the Imperium hope to disrupt the unprecedented coordination displayed by the Greenskin forces. This approach required intelligence that the Imperium currently lacked. The location of the beast's primary base remained unknown, as did the exact number and distribution of attack moons throughout Imperial space. Before the Last Wall could launch any offensive operation, these knowledge gaps needed to be filled. The Council authorized the formation of specialized reconnaissance detachments, drawing veterans from multiple chapters to create balanced teams capable of operating independently in Ork-controlled space. These Deathwatch units, as they came to be known, would infiltrate Ork-held systems, gather critical intelligence, and relay their findings back to Terra through secure astropathic channels. As these preparations continued, the attack moon above Terra finally moved. Not to attack, as many had feared, but to adjust its position slightly, maintaining optimal orbital coverage while accommodating the arrival of something new, a massive Ork vessel, unlike any previously encountered, approaching from the system's edge. Augur arrays identified it as a command ship of some kind, its hull decorated with trophies and totems of war that dwarfed even the largest Imperial warships. The beast had arrived personally to oversee the assault on humanity's birthworld, and the Last Wall would face its first true test sooner than anyone had anticipated. Lord Commander Lansung paced the length of his private chambers, ornate boot heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The strategic hololiths surrounding him displayed a grim reality. The attack moon still loomed over Terra, the Last Wall protocol had been activated, and his authority as the nominal head of the Imperium's military was being steadily eroded. Each report from the frontlines further diminished his standing among the High Lords. Something dramatic was needed to reassert his position, something that would demonstrate his leadership and commitment to Terra's defense. The idea came to him as he reviewed population statistics for the Sol system. Terra teemed with billions of citizens, most living in sprawling hive complexes that stretched across the planet's surface. These masses represented an untapped resource, a potential fighting force that dwarfed even the largest Imperial Guard regiments. If properly mobilized, they could form an army unlike any seen since the days of the Great Crusade. Lansung summoned his closest advisors and outlined his vision: a massive citizen militia drawn from Terra's population, armed and dispatched to confront the Ork threat directly. He named it the Proletarian Crusade, deliberately invoking religious terminology to secure the ecclesiarchy's support. The proposed force would number in the billions, overwhelming the Orks through sheer numerical advantage rather than military skill. When presented to the High Lords, the plan received mixed reactions. Ecclesiarch Messring immediately endorsed the proposal, seeing an opportunity to demonstrate the faithful's devotion to the Emperor. The Master of the Administratum expressed concern about the logistical challenges, but was swayed by the political advantages of supporting such a visible initiative. Only Draken Vangorich, the Grand Master of Assassins, voiced outright opposition, pointing out the obvious military flaws in sending untrained civilians against Ork warriors. "The Orks will slaughter them by the millions," Vangorich stated flatly during a closed session of the High Lords. "You propose to arm civilians with Law's weapons they've never fired and expect them to defeat an enemy that massacred the Imperial fists." Lansung dismissed these concerns with practiced political skill, framing Vangorich's opposition as elitism and lack of faith in the common citizen's devotion to the Emperor. The majority of High Lords, more concerned with maintaining their own positions than with military practicalities, voted to approve the Proletarian Crusade. Recruitment would begin immediately, with deployment scheduled within 3 months. The mobilization machinery of Terra cranked into motion with frightening efficiency. Administratum officials swept through hive complexes, conscripting able-bodied citizens regardless of their occupations or family situations. Quotas were established for each hive city, creating competition between local officials to provide the most recruits. Those who failed to meet expectations faced accusations of insufficient patriotism, or worse, suspected Ork sympathy. Manufacturing facilities across Terra were repurposed to produce basic weapons and equipment for the growing crusade. Forge temples worked at maximum capacity, churning out millions of mass-produced lasguns, flak armor, and combat fatigues. Quality control was minimal. The emphasis remained on quantity rather than effectiveness. Many of these weapons would fail after a few shots, and the armor provided little actual protection against Ork weaponry. Training for these conscripts existed in name only. Most received less than a week of basic instruction before being declared combat ready. The curriculum focused heavily on patriotic indoctrination and religious fervor rather than practical combat skills. Ecclesiarchy priests moved among the training grounds, whipping recruits into a religious frenzy, with promises of the Emperor's favor and eternal glory for those who fell in battle. The propaganda campaign supporting the crusade saturated Terra's communication networks. Voxcasters broadcast continuous updates on recruitment numbers and preparation progress. Public executions of Ork sympathizers, often simply those who questioned the wisdom of the crusade, were transmitted live to demonstrate the consequences of disloyalty. Massive parades showcased the growing crusade forces, carefully choreographed to hide their lack of training and proper equipment. Behind closed doors, the political maneuvering intensified. Lansung leveraged the Crusade's popularity to consolidate his position among the High Lords, systematically sidelining potential rivals. Those who expressed skepticism about the Crusade found their department's funding cut, or their subordinates reassigned to Crusade-related duties. The Lord Commander was building not just an army, but a power base that would secure his authority regardless of the military outcome. Courland, upon learning of the Proletarian Crusade, immediately requested an audience with the High Lords to express his opposition. The last son of Dorn understood what Lansung either failed to grasp or deliberately ignored. The Orks they faced were not the disorganized hordes of previous encounters, but a sophisticated military force led by commanders of unprecedented tactical acumen. "These civilians will die for nothing," Courland informed the assembled High Lords. They lacked the training, equipment, and leadership necessary to combat even conventional Ork forces, let alone those we now face. This crusade will provide the beast with billions of easy kills while achieving no strategic objective. Lansung countered by questioning Courland's authority. The Imperial fists, he pointed out with barely concealed satisfaction, no longer existed as a functional chapter. Courland represented only himself, not the legacy of Rogel Dorn. The Last Wall Protocol, while historically significant, held no legal weight within the Imperium's current command structure. The civilian government, as embodied by the High Lords, retained ultimate authority over military matters. The political battle lines were clearly drawn. Lansung had secured the support of the ecclesiarchy, the administratum, and several minor High Lords whose positions depended on his goodwill. Courland had the backing of the assembled Astartes forces, the tacit support of the Officio Assassinorum through Vangorich, and the technical expertise of the Mechanicus, whose representatives recognized the military realities that Lansung ignored. As the deployment date approached, the proletarian crusade swelled to unprecedented numbers. Official administratum records claimed 8 billion citizens had been armed and organized, though the actual number was closer to 6 billion. These forces were divided into loosely defined battle groups, each theoretically responsible for specific objectives, though few commanders understood their assigned tasks or possessed the means to accomplish them. The Crusade fleet itself represented another logistical nightmare. With insufficient military transports available, the administratum commandeered civilian vessels of all types, cargo haulers, system monitors, even luxury yachts belonging to Terra's nobility. These ships lacked void shields, proper life support for military transport, or point defense weapons. They would be flying coffins when faced with even minimal Ork resistance. Command structures within the Crusade existed more on organizational charts than in practical reality. Lansung appointed political allies to key leadership positions regardless of their military experience. These commanders, more concerned with their own status than with battlefield effectiveness, frequently contradicted each other's orders or issued directives that displayed fundamental misunderstandings of void warfare. 3 days before the scheduled deployment, Courland made a final attempt to prevent the catastrophe he saw coming. He approached Vangorich, suggesting that the Officio Assassinorum might resolve the Lansung problem directly. The Grand Master refused, not out of any moral qualm but from practical consideration. Eliminating Lansung would create a power vacuum that might prove even more damaging during the current crisis. Instead, Vangorich proposed a compromise: allow the crusade to proceed but minimize its scope. Rather than sending all 6 billion conscripts at once, deploy them in waves, with each subsequent wave contingent on the success of the previous one. This approach might limit casualties while still satisfying Lansung's political objectives. Courland presented this alternative to the High Lords, framing it as a tactical refinement rather than a fundamental change to the Crusade concept. Lansung initially resisted, but reconsidered when the Fabricator General supported the phased deployment approach. The compromise was approved, though Lansung insisted that the first wave include at least 2 billion citizens to maintain the Crusade's impressive scale. The day of deployment arrived with choreographed pageantry. Massive processions filled Terra's main thoroughfares as the First Crusade contingents marched toward their transport ships. Ecclesiarchy priests walked alongside the columns, swinging censers and leading the conscripts in hymns to the Emperor. From the Sanctum Imperialis, the High Lords watched the spectacle, each contemplating how to leverage the coming events to their advantage. The fleet departed Terra's orbit with great ceremony, thousands of vessels forming a massive convoy that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The attack moon, still maintaining its position above the Imperial Palace, made no move to intercept these ships. This apparent passivity, interpreted by Lansung as hesitation or even fear, further convinced him of the Crusade's potential success. In reality, the Beast's forces were simply allowing the proletarian crusade to advance into optimal killing positions. Ork vessels remained hidden behind Luna and in the asteroid belt, tracking the human fleet's progress while preparing coordinated ambush positions. The attack moon served as both observation post and command center, relaying tactical information to Ork forces throughout the system. The first engagement occurred near the orbit of Mars. A contingent of Ork attack craft emerged from concealment among the asteroid belt, targeting the weakest sections of the Crusade fleet. These were not the ramshackle fighters typical of Ork forces, but sleek, purpose-built interceptors that moved with precision and coordination. They concentrated fire on transport vessels carrying the heaviest concentrations of troops, ignoring empty or lightly loaded ships. The Crusade's escort vessels, mostly repurposed system monitors with minimal weaponry, attempted to form defensive screens around the transports. Their efforts proved futile against the Ork attackers' superior maneuverability and firepower. Within hours, hundreds of transports had been destroyed, venting their human cargo into the void. The survivors, packed into the remaining vessels, continued toward their objective with no meaningful change to their tactical approach. As the fleet approached the main Ork positions, the full extent of Lansung's miscalculation became apparent. The Orks had established a multi-layered defense in depth, with smaller attack craft serving as the outer screen for more powerful capital ships. These larger vessels emerged from hiding as the human fleet drew near, their weapons already tracking the approaching transports. The Crusade commanders, monitoring the battle from command ships at the rear of the formation, issued contradictory orders that created confusion throughout the fleet. Some transports accelerated, hoping to break through the Ork line before the defenses could consolidate. Others attempted to withdraw, colliding with vessels still advancing. The resulting chaos exceeded even the Orks' expectations, as the human fleet effectively disabled itself before significant enemy fire could be brought to bear. When the Ork capital ships opened fire, they did so with shocking precision. Rather than the indiscriminate barrage typical of greenskin vessels, they targeted command and control ships specifically, eliminating what little coordinated leadership the Crusade possessed. Secondary batteries focused on transports carrying heavy weapons or vehicle support, ensuring that any troops who reached their destinations would lack fire support. The few Crusade vessels that managed to reach their designated landing zones discovered another aspect of the Orks' evolved tactics. Rather than contesting landings directly, the Greenskins allowed human forces to disembark and establish preliminary footholds. Once the conscripts had committed to their positions and expended initial supplies, Ork counterattacks struck from unexpected directions, often emerging from teleportation platforms that bypassed defensive perimeters entirely. The psychological impact of these tactics proved as devastating as their physical effects. Crusade troops, already terrified and poorly trained, found themselves surrounded by enemies who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Mass panic ensued, with entire battalions abandoning their positions and fleeing into the waiting guns of Ork second waves. Those who stood their ground fared no better, as their inadequate weapons and armor proved useless against even basic Ork infantry. Reports of the unfolding disaster reached Terra in fragments, as the Crusade's communication network collapsed under Ork jamming and the loss of relay stations. Lansung initially dismissed the negative information as exaggeration or defeatism, focusing instead on isolated instances of temporary success. He ordered the second wave to prepare for immediate deployment, convinced that additional numbers would overwhelm the Ork defenses regardless of initial setbacks. Vangorich, receiving more accurate intelligence through his own networks, presented the unvarnished truth to a closed session of the High Lords. The first wave of the Proletarian Crusade had been effectively annihilated, with casualty rates exceeding 95%. The remaining forces were scattered, leaderless, and being systematically hunted down by Ork kill teams. Deploying the second wave would simply provide the beast with additional targets. The attack moon that loomed over Terra had maintained its position for weeks, a silent sentinel that seemed content to observe Imperial preparations rather than unleash its devastating weaponry. This apparent restraint wasn't mercy but calculation, a predator studying its prey before the killing stroke. The beast's strategic acumen had already been demonstrated at Artamantua and Proximo, but what followed would showcase a level of tactical sophistication previously unthinkable from the Greenskin race. On the 283rd day of 544, As dawn broke over the Himalayan mountains, the attack moon's surface rippled with sudden activity. Observation posts throughout the Imperial Palace detected multiple launch signatures, but these weren't the expected bombardment projectiles. Instead, dozens of specialized landing craft detached from the Orkish construct, their trajectory taking them not toward military installations or defensive emplacements, but directly toward the heart of imperial governance, the Sanctum Imperialis itself. These vessels employed previously unseen stealth technology, absorbing auger pings rather than reflecting them, making targeting almost impossible. Palace defenses activated automatically, filling the sky with Law's fire and defensive missiles, but the Orkish craft demonstrated uncanny evasive capabilities. They corkscrewed through the densest fire zones, their hulls absorbing direct hits without apparent damage. The vessels that reached the palace exterior disgorged not the typical Ork boys, but specialized infiltration units, commandos of unprecedented sophistication. Standing taller than standard Orks but smaller than the Beast-class commanders, these greenskins moved with disciplined precision. Their armor incorporated adaptive camouflage technology that shifted colors to match surroundings, while their weapons included silent sluggas and specialized cutting tools designed for breaching adamantium barriers. The palace's external defenses had been designed to repel frontal assaults by conventional forces, not infiltration by small, highly specialized units. The commandos exploited this vulnerability, bypassing main defensive lines to penetrate deep into the palace complex through maintenance ducts, waste disposal systems, and ancient access tunnels dating back to the Unification Wars. Their target was not the Emperor's throne room. Even the Beast recognized the impossibility of reaching that most sacred and defended location, but rather the Senatorum Imperialis, where the High Lords conducted their business. Inside the Senatorum, an emergency session was underway. The catastrophic failure of the Proletarian Crusade had finally forced even the most obstinate High Lords to acknowledge the severity of the Ork threat. Lord Commander Lansung, his political position weakening by the hour, had called the meeting ostensibly to discuss alternative defense strategies. In reality, he sought to deflect blame for the Crusade's failure onto his rivals, while consolidating what authority remained to him. The session had devolved into typical bureaucratic infighting when the first commando units breached the chamber's outer security cordon. The Adeptus Custodes maintained a token presence in the Senatorum, just 8 warriors, as the vast majority of the Emperor's guardians remained focused on protecting the throne room itself. These superhuman warriors responded with characteristic efficiency when the intrusion alarm sounded, forming a protective ring around the High Lords while voxing for reinforcements. What followed demonstrated the evolution of Ork tactical doctrine under the Beast's influence. Rather than engaging the Custodes directly, the first wave of commandos focused on environmental systems, deploying specialized smoke grenades that filled the chamber with thick, acrid clouds that partially blinded even enhanced Astartes visual systems. Secondary teams targeted power relays, plunging sections of the chamber into darkness while disabling automated defense turrets. Only when these preparatory actions were complete did the main assault begin. Commandos attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously, using the confusion to maximum advantage. The Custodes fought with transcendent skill, each warrior accounting for dozens of attackers, but they found themselves hindered by the need to protect the High Lords, many of whom were frozen in shock or attempting to flee in different directions. Draken Vangorich, alone among the High Lords, responded with lethal competence. The Grand Master of Assassins drew a masterfully crafted digital weapon from his sleeve and dropped 3 approaching commandos with precision headshots. He then attempted to organize an evacuation, recognizing that the chamber was indefensible against the coordinated Ork assault. His efforts were hampered by Lansung, who demanded priority protection while refusing to leave his position of authority. The Fabricator General activated integrated defense systems within his mechanized body, unfurling weapon appendages that cut down several attackers. His augmetic systems provided some resistance to the smoke's obscuring effects, allowing him to coordinate with Custodes Captain General Catafalque, who had arrived with reinforcements but was struggling to reach the inner chamber through corridors now swarming with commandos. Ecclesiarch Messring met his end while attempting to invoke the Emperor's protection through prayer rather than seeking cover. A commando's blade separated his head from his shoulders mid-litany, the ceremonial mitre tumbling across the chamber floor. The master of the administratum died moments later, riddled with fire from silenced sluggas as he cowered behind his ornate throne. The chancellor of the estate Imperium, attempting to access a hidden escape passage known only to senior officials, found commandos already emerging from it. Their presence there confirmed what Vangorich had already suspected. The Orks had obtained detailed intelligence about the palace's layout, including classified evacuation routes. This wasn't merely an attack, but a carefully planned decapitation strike based on comprehensive knowledge of imperial governance structures. The paternoval envoy of the Navis Nobilite died protecting his aide, displaying unexpected courage from a representative typically concerned with navigators' privileges rather than direct action. The master of the Astronomicon was dragged away alive, the commandos showing unusual restraint that suggested specific capture orders rather than random violence. Throughout the palace complex, similar targeted strikes unfolded with horrifying synchronization. The headquarters of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica came under assault by a separate commando team, who slaughtered the administrative staff while taking several senior astropaths captive. The Central Logistical Command, which coordinated Battlefleet Solar's movements, found its communication systems compromised and its senior officers assassinated at their posts. These weren't the actions of mindless Xenos, but a sophisticated military operation designed to maximize strategic impact while minimizing resource expenditure. The beast wasn't attempting to conquer the palace. Such an effort would have required forces orders of magnitude larger, but to create precisely targeted disruption that would paralyze Imperial command functions at a critical moment. Back in the Senatorum, Custod's Captain General Catafalque finally broke through to the inner chamber with a Terminator squad, creating a momentary respite in the fighting. He found fewer than half the High Lords still alive, with Vangorich coordinating a fighting retreat toward a reinforced panic room designed to withstand even Heresy-era bombardment. The Grand Master had abandoned attempts to save Lansung, who lay dead near his throne, his ornate uniform saturated with blood from multiple wounds. Catafalque's forces secured a corridor to the panic room, allowing Vangorich to evacuate the surviving High Lords, the Fabricator General, the Grand Provost Marshal, and the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes himself, who had been absent when the attack began. The Master of the Administratum had suffered grievous wounds, but clung to life through sheer stubbornness and extensive augmetic enhancements. As the survivors reached relative safety, the true extent of the catastrophe became apparent through fragmentary Vox reports. 6 of the 12 High Lords were confirmed dead, with 2 others missing and presumed captured. Dozens of secondary administrative officials had been killed, along with hundreds of support staff. More concerning were the targeted abductions. Senior astropaths, navigators, and communications specialists had been taken alive, suggesting the Orks sought to extract information rather than simply decapitate Imperial leadership. The palace's defensive forces gradually contained the attack, with Custodes and Lucifer Black regiments methodically clearing compromised sections. The commandos fought with discipline even when tactically defeated, often detonating explosive devices rather than allowing themselves to be captured. Those few taken alive revealed another disturbing aspect of the beast's forces. These weren't merely trained fighters, but specifically modified Orks with enhanced cognitive capabilities and specialized equipment designed for their infiltration mission. In the attack's aftermath, Vangorich emerged as the de facto leader of the remaining High Lords. The Grand Master's composure during the crisis, combined with his Officio Assassinorum's relatively intact command structure, positioned him to fill the power vacuum. His first action was to implement emergency protocols that had existed since the heresy but never been activated, the devolution of Imperial authority to secondary command nodes throughout Terra, ensuring basic governmental functions could continue despite the Senatorum's devastation. Vangorich's ascendancy wasn't without opposition. The Fabricator General, speaking through a Vox emitter as his primary speech systems had been damaged in the attack, questioned whether the Officio Assassinorum had possessed prior intelligence about the attack that hadn't been shared. This thinly veiled accusation of negligence, or worse, complicity, reflected the paranoia now permeating the highest levels of imperial governance. The Grand Master responded by granting the Mechanicus unprecedented access to the palace's security systems for analysis and reinforcement, a concession that temporarily mollified the Fabricator General while simultaneously placing Mechanicus assets under closer Assassinorum observation. This delicate balance of mutual suspicion and pragmatic cooperation characterized the emergency administration that formed in the beheading's aftermath. Courland, upon learning of the attack while coordinating last wall forces aboard the Phalanx, immediately recognized its strategic significance. The beast had demonstrated not just the ability to strike at Terra directly, but to do so with precise intelligence about Imperial leadership structures. This suggested either extensive prior infiltration or, more worryingly, some form of ongoing intelligence gathering that remained undetected. The last Son of Dorn requested an immediate audience with the surviving High Lords, a meeting Vangorich arranged in a secure bunker deep beneath the palace. There, Courland presented his assessment with characteristic directness. The beheading represented not just a tactical strike, but a sophisticated psychological operation. By demonstrating the ability to reach even the most protected Imperial leaders, the beast had undermined confidence in Terra's defenses more effectively than any frontal assault could have. More concerning was the pattern emerging across multiple fronts. The attack moons, the targeting of specific officials for capture rather than killing, the precision strikes against communication infrastructure, all suggested a comprehensive strategic vision previously unthinkable from Ork forces. The beast wasn't simply attacking the Imperium, but systematically dismantling its command and control capabilities as prelude to something larger. Vangorich, who had independently reached similar conclusions, proposed an unprecedented restructuring of Imperial defense. Traditional chains of command had been compromised, and conventional military responses had proven ineffective against the beast's forces. A more adaptive, decentralized approach would be necessary, one that could respond to Orkish innovations without requiring approval from a bureaucracy now in disarray. The Grand Master's proposal effectively granted Courland operational autonomy to coordinate all military assets in the Sol system, including not just the last wall forces, but also Battlefleet Solar, remaining Imperial Guard regiments, and even Mechanicus defense forces. This arrangement bypassed centuries of carefully maintained separation between different Imperial military branches, a firebreak against potential coups that had existed since the heresy. Such consolidation of authority would have been unthinkable before the beheading, but the remaining High Lords recognized the necessity of extraordinary measures. With the traditional administrative apparatus in shambles and the attack moon still looming overhead, conventional governance had become an unaffordable luxury. The emergency reorganization was approved with minimal debate, a process that would once have required months of negotiation, compressed into hours of crisis management. As Courland departed to implement this new command structure, Vangorich remained with the other surviving High Lords to address the question that now dominated their private discussions. How had the Orks obtained such detailed information about the palace's internal layout, security protocols, and leadership schedules? The possibilities were all disturbing: a high-level traitor, previously undetected infiltration, or some form of surveillance technology beyond Imperial understanding. The Grand Master initiated the most comprehensive counterintelligence operation in Imperial history, deploying assets from all 6 assassin temples to investigate potential security breaches. Calidus agents assumed the identities of fallen officials to identify unusual information requests. Vannis Temple operatives combed through data archives seeking unauthorized access patterns. Culexus assassins scanned for psychic intrusions that might have bypassed physical security measures. This investigation revealed disturbing patterns that extended far beyond the immediate attack. For years, seemingly minor security incidents had occurred throughout the palace complex: misplaced documents, unexplained access to restricted areas, equipment malfunctions in surveillance systems. Each incident, trivial in isolation, formed part of a comprehensive intelligence gathering operation that had apparently been underway since before the first attack moon appeared. The implications were staggering. The beast's forces hadn't simply evolved technologically, but had developed strategic patience and espionage capabilities that rivaled the Imperium's own intelligence services. They had prepared the beheading operation meticulously, accumulating information over an extended period before striking with precision that would have impressed even the legendary Alpha Legion. As the investigation continued, Vangorich focused on rebuilding the shattered Imperial leadership. New acting High Lords were appointed from secondary officials, creating a provisional government that could maintain basic functions while more permanent arrangements were developed. The Grand Master carefully selected individuals whose competence exceeded their ambition, ensuring the emergency administration would support rather than hinder military operations against the beast. Corlin stood alone in the reclusium of the Phalanx, surrounded by the relics of a chapter that now existed only in memory. The last son of Dorn had spent hours in silent contemplation before the assembled artifacts of his gene father, fragments of armor, weapons wielded during the Great Crusade, and personal effects salvaged from campaigns long past. These were not merely historical curiosities, but tangible connections to the Primarch, whose genetic legacy flowed through Corlin's veins. The plan forming in his mind was unprecedented, bordering on technological heresy and doctrinal blasphemy. Yet in the aftermath of the beheading, with Terra's leadership decimated and conventional military responses proving inadequate against the beast's forces, desperate measures seemed not merely justified but necessary. Corland activated his armor's encrypted Vox channel, connecting to Fabricator General Kubik. The conversation that followed was conducted in technical terminology and oblique references, both men aware that even supposedly secure communications might be compromised. The substance, however, was clear. Corland sought access to classified Mechanicus vaults on Mars, repositories containing genetic material and artifacts dating back to the Emperor's original Primarch project. Kubik's initial response was predictable, outright refusal, wrapped in ritualistic invocations of Mechanicus doctrine. The vaults in question were among the most restricted areas on Mars, sealed by order of the Emperor himself after the Primarch project's completion. Even the Fabricator General's authority extended only to knowledge of their existence, not access to their contents. Corland had anticipated this resistance. His counter-argument focused not on sentiment or desperation, but on pragmatic necessity. The beast represented an evolutionary leap in Orkish development unseen in Imperial history, a threat that conventional forces had repeatedly failed to counter. The Imperium needed its own evolutionary response, a weapon from its golden age when humanity had faced similar existential threats. The debate continued for hours, with Kubik consulting encrypted Mechanicus archives between exchanges. Eventually, the Fabricator General's resistance wavered, not from persuasion, but from his own analysis of classified technical data concerning the attack moons. The gravitational weapons they employed operated on principles that violated known physical laws, suggesting technological advancement beyond anything the Mechanicus could counter with current resources. Authorization came with stringent conditions. The expedition to the Martian vaults would proceed under joint Imperial Fists Mechanicus authority, with Corland permitted a small team of his choosing, while Kubik would select Mechanicus representatives of appropriate rank and discretion. The operation would remain absolutely classified, with all participants subject to memory modification if the mission failed or proved unfeasible. Preparations began immediately. Corland selected his team with careful consideration, veterans from different successor chapters whose combined expertise covered both the tactical and theological implications of what they sought. From the Crimson Fists came Apothecary Pavelka, whose expertise in gene seed matters exceeded that of many Magos biologists. The Black Templars contributed Chaplain Benedictus, whose unshakable faith would either legitimize their endeavor or condemn it as heresy. Techmarine Jeremiah of the Fists Exemplar would interface with Mechanicus systems while maintaining loyalty to Astartes' priorities. The journey to Mars occurred without ceremony aboard a nondescript Mechanicus transport, the team's armor and equipment concealed beneath robes and shrouds typical of Mechanicus adepts. The deception was necessary. Knowledge of their mission would provoke controversy throughout the Imperium, potentially undermining the already fragile command structure Vangorich had established after the beheading. Their destination was not the gleaming spires of Olympus Mons or the vast forges that dominated the Martian surface, but a seemingly abandoned complex in the northern polar region. Ancient records referred to it as the sarcophagus, a facility dating back to the earliest days of the Mechanicum's alliance with the Emperor, its existence removed from public archives after the heresy. Access required multiple layers of authentication, including genetic verification from both Courland and Cubic's representative, Archmagos Dominus Van Stubbs. The massive vault doors, untouched for millennia, opened with surprising smoothness, suggesting automated maintenance systems that had continued functioning long after the facility's abandonment. The interior revealed a labyrinth of laboratories, stasis chambers, and data repositories. Mechanicus lumens cast harsh light over workstations where the Emperor himself had once conducted experiments fundamental to the Primarch project. The team moved through these spaces with appropriate reverence, Chaplain Benedictus murmuring prayers to ward against technological spirits, while Techmarine Jeremiah interfaced with ancient consoles to navigate the complex. Their objective lay in the facility's central chamber, a reinforced vault containing genetic samples and partial templates from the original Primarch project. According to Mechanicus records, after the Primarch's scattering by Chaos forces, the Emperor had preserved backup materials for each of his sons, though these samples lacked the complete genetic sequences necessary for recreation of the Primarchs themselves. For Courland's purposes, these partial templates might suffice. He sought not to create a new Primarch, but to potentially restore one, specifically Vulcan of the Salamanders. Unlike other Primarchs who had died or disappeared completely, historical records suggested Vulcan possessed unique regenerative capabilities. Furthermore, fragmentary reports indicated he had established hidden caches throughout the Imperium containing artifacts of tremendous power, including what some texts referred to as the Unbound Flame, a device of unknown purpose but apparently significant potential. The theological implications of attempting to resurrect a Primarch troubled Chaplain Benedictus deeply. As the team secured the genetic materials and prepared to access the deeper vaults, he confronted Courland directly. The Imperial Creed taught that the Primarchs were divine creations, sons of the god Emperor himself. Attempting to manipulate such sacred genetic material through technological means might constitute blasphemy of the highest order. Courland acknowledged these concerns without dismissing them. The theological questions were valid, but they existed alongside practical imperatives. If successful, their efforts might restore a being who had walked alongside the Emperor during humanity's greatest age, a leader whose strategic genius and combat prowess far exceeded even the most accomplished chapter masters. If unsuccessful, they would have violated sacred principles for nothing, potentially damaging the spiritual foundation that sustained the Imperium through its darkest hours. The debate extended beyond theological concerns into practical questions of imperial doctrine. The Codex Astartes, foundation of space marine organization since the heresy, had deliberately divided the legions to prevent any single commander from wielding excessive power. Restoring a Primarch would fundamentally undermine this carefully maintained balance, creating a figure whose authority would supersede not just the High Lords, but potentially the institutional structures of the Imperium itself. These discussions continued as the team penetrated deeper into the facility, eventually reaching a chamber unlisted in any of the provided schematics. The massive doors bore warning runes in ancient Terran scripts, along with mechanical locks that appeared to have been sealed with technologies no longer understood even by the Mechanicus representatives. Archmagos Stubbs hesitated before these barriers, his mechadendrites twitching with what appeared to be genuine apprehension. The seals, he explained, incorporated technologies bearing the Emperor's personal encryption, defenses designed to withstand attempts at access even by senior Mechanicus adepts. Breaching them without proper authorization might trigger catastrophic security measures. Courland approached the doors with measured steps. As the last living Imperial Fist, he carried within him the purest available strain of Rogel Dorn's gene seed, minimally degraded by successive generations of implantation. If any genetic key might bypass the Emperor's security measures, it would be the direct lineage of one of his sons. The gamble proved partially successful. The outer seals recognized Courland's genetic profile, permitting preliminary access while maintaining secondary containment protocols. Beyond the first set of doors lay an antechamber containing stasis units of advanced design, each bearing the symbol of a different legion. Most appeared inactive, their power systems long dormant, but one emitted a faint energy signature that drew the team's attention. The unit bore the salamander emblem of Vulcan's Legion. Unlike the others, its stasis field remained partially active, preserving not a complete body but fragmentary biological materials, specifically, what appeared to be severely damaged tissue samples from Vulcan himself. According to accompanying data crystals that Techmarine Jeremiah carefully extracted and decoded, these samples had been recovered from Istvan V after the drop site massacre, preserved by loyalist elements who had escaped the slaughter. Apothecary Pavelka examined the samples with instruments both ancient and modern, his expression growing increasingly troubled. The genetic material showed signs of extraordinary resilience, with cellular structures attempting self-repair even after millennia in degraded stasis. More concerning were energy patterns unlike anything in his experience, not warp contamination, as might be expected from chaos influence, but something more fundamental, as if the material itself existed partially outside conventional physical laws. The team's discovery extended beyond biological samples. Adjacent storage units contained artifacts of Vulcan's creation, weapons, armor components, and technological devices whose purpose remained unclear. Most significant was a sealed container bearing Vulcan's personal sigil, alongside warning runes in the Primarch's own handwriting. Inside lay what appeared to be a mechanical heart of incredibly sophisticated design, pulsing with barely perceptible energy despite its dormant state. Archmago Stubbs identified this device as the Unbound Flame mentioned in fragmentary records, not a weapon as previously assumed, but a technological marvel designed by Vulcan himself as a contingency against his own death. According to accompanying documentation, the device could potentially restore the Primarch if combined with sufficient genetic material and subjected to specific activation protocols. The ethical debate intensified as the team assessed these discoveries. They had sought materials to potentially resurrect a Primarch. They had found what appeared to be Vulcan's own contingency plan for his restoration. This changed the moral calculus significantly. They would not be creating or manipulating life against divine will, but potentially fulfilling the Primarch's own intentions. Chaplain Benedictus, initially the most resistant to their mission, found his position shifting. The Emperor had created the Primarchs for humanity's defense during its greatest need. If Vulcan himself had prepared for his return during another such crisis, implementing those preparations might represent obedience to both the Primarchs and ultimately the Emperor's will. The technical challenges remained formidable. The activation protocols required facilities beyond what the Martian vault contained, specifically, a forge of unusual design incorporating both conventional technology and psychic components. Such a facility existed in only one known location, the Primarch's own sanctuary on Nocturne, the homeworld of the Salamander's chapter. Transportation of the recovered materials presented its own difficulties. The stasis technology preserving Vulcan's remains required constant monitoring and energy input, necessitating a specialized containment system that Techmarine Jeremiah and Archmago Stubbs collaborated to construct. The Unbound Flame proved equally challenging to transport, its energy signature fluctuating unpredictably when moved more than a few meters from its original containment. The return journey to Terra occurred under conditions of absolute secrecy, the team's transport taking an indirect route to avoid interception. Upon reaching the Phalanx, Courland established a secure laboratory in the Star Fortress's most protected section, accessible only to those directly involved in the project. There, Apothecary Pavelka began the painstaking process of assessing the genetic material's viability, while Techmarine Jeremiah studied the activation requirements for the unbound flame. Word of their discovery reached Vangorich through secure channels. The Grand Master's reaction combined pragmatic assessment with rare emotional response. If successful, a restored Primarch would provide not just military leadership, but a symbolic rallying point for an Imperium reeling from the beheading. The psychological impact of a Primarch's return might prove as valuable as his tactical acumen, restoring morale shattered by successive defeats. The journey to Nocturne required careful coordination with the Salamander's chapter, whose cooperation was essential, but could not include full disclosure of the mission's purpose. Chapter Master Tushin, upon receiving Corlin's heavily redacted request for access to certain sacred sites, responded with understandable suspicion. The Salamanders guarded their Primarch's legacy zealously, particularly the hidden forges where Vulcan had created his greatest works. The revelation that the beast had constructed his empire on the symbolic ground of humanity's greatest triumph against the Greenskins sent shockwaves through the Imperial command structure. Magos Eldon Urquaidex, a stellar cartographer of considerable renown within the Mechanicus, had spent weeks analyzing the fragmented data collected from captured Ork navigation systems. The patterns initially seemed random, a chaotic web of coordinates that defied conventional Imperial astrogation methods. It was only when Urquaidex applied pre-heresy cartographic templates that the truth emerged with horrifying clarity. Ullener Prime, as the Orks had designated it, not Ullener itself, a subtle distinction that had confounded initial analysis, occupied the exact spatial coordinates of what Imperial records identified as the Ullener system. The system where, in the final triumphant campaign of the Great Crusade, the Emperor and his Primarchs had broken the back of the largest Ork empire yet encountered. Where the Master of Mankind had stood before the assembled might of the Imperium and elevated Horus to Warmaster before returning to Terra. Urquaidex's discovery explained much about the beast's strategic focus. The Greenskin leader hadn't simply built an empire, he had reclaimed one, deliberately centering his power on the world that represented both the Orks' greatest defeat and humanity's moment of impending fracture. The symbolism couldn't be ignored. The beast understood the psychological impact of this choice, a level of historical awareness previously unthinkable in Ork leadership. The Mechanicus team under Urquaidex expanded their analysis to the surrounding sectors, mapping the full extent of the beast's domain. What they discovered defied conventional understanding of Ork expansion patterns. Rather than the chaotic, opportunistic spread typical of Greenskin conquests, the beast had established a sophisticated network of tributary worlds in concentric rings around Ullener Prime. Each ring served specific functions within the Empire's structure, the innermost systems providing elite warriors and advanced technology, middle rings focused on resource extraction and fleet construction, outermost areas serving as buffer zones and early warning systems. This organizational sophistication extended to the Empire's infrastructure. Captured Ork data cores revealed standardized transportation routes between systems, with specialized vessels moving resources from extraction worlds to manufacturing centers with remarkable efficiency. Dedicated communication relays, utilizing technology that somehow stabilized astropathic signals, maintained command and control across vast distances, allowing the beast to coordinate actions across multiple sectors simultaneously. Most concerning was the production capacity this infrastructure supported. Urquaidex's analysis suggested that the attack moons represented only a fraction of the beast's military potential. The manufacturing worlds within the Empire's middle rings could produce conventional warships at rates exceeding the output of major Imperial Forge worlds. Resource extraction operations stripped entire planets bare within months, feeding an industrial machine of staggering proportions. Corlin studied these reports aboard the Phalanx, the massive hololithic display before him showing the full extent of the beast's domain in grim crimson markers against the blue of Imperial space. The pattern was unmistakable, a massive, organized empire with Ullener Prime at its heart, its borders expanding in all directions, but with particular pressure against the segmentum solar. The beast wasn't simply raiding or conquering, he was systematically pushing toward Terra along multiple advance axes. The strategic implications were clear. Conventional containment approaches would fail against an enemy with such resource depth and organizational coherence. Defensive actions might slow the beast's advance but couldn't reverse it. The Imperium needed to strike directly at the Empire's heart, Ullener Prime itself, to decapitate the command structure and disrupt the unprecedented coordination that made these Orks so lethal. Planning such an offensive presented challenges unlike anything Imperial strategists had faced in centuries. The Last Wall forces, while formidable, lacked the raw numbers needed for a conventional assault against the beast's homeworld. Battlefleet Solar had been severely depleted by successive engagements against attack moons. The Imperial Guard regiments that remained combat effective after the Proletarian Crusade disaster were scattered across defensive positions throughout the segmentum. Vangorich, applying his analytical skills to military matters rather than his usual assassination operations, proposed an unconventional approach. Rather than attempting to match the beast's forces in a war of attrition, the Imperium would assemble a specialized strike force, smaller than a conventional invasion fleet, but comprised of elite units specifically configured for the mission parameters. This force would penetrate the beast's defensive perimeter through stealth rather than brute force, utilizing designated insertion corridors identified through Officio Assassinorum intelligence gathering. The core of this strike force would naturally be the Astartes of the Last Wall. Corlund selected specialized companies from each successor chapter, prioritizing those with relevant combat expertise. The Crimson Fists contributed their veteran First Company, whose experience fighting evolved Orks on Rin's world proved invaluable during planning sessions. From the Black Templars came the Sword Brethren of Castellan Bohemon's household, close-quarters combat specialists whose zealous determination would be needed when facing the beast's elite guards. The Fists Exemplar provided breacher teams equipped with specialized siege equipment designed to penetrate the massive fortifications Mechanicus auger scans had detected around the beast's primary fortress. Supporting these Astartes would be selected Imperial Guard regiments with proven combat records against Ork forces. The Cadian 8th, veterans of multiple greenskin pacification campaigns, would provide infantry support with their characteristic discipline and tactical flexibility. The Elysian 16th Drop Regiment specialized in rapid insertion operations critical to the mission's early phases. Artillery support would come from the Mordian 7th Heavy Regiment, whose precision bombardment techniques could provide crucial fire support without the collateral damage that might compromise sensitive objectives. The Mechanicus contribution proved more contentious. Fabricator General Kubik initially resisted committing significant forces to what he termed a high-variance operation with suboptimal probability matrices. His resistance softened when Ork Waaagh presented data suggesting the beast had accessed ancient technological knowledge previously thought lost to humanity. The prospect of recovering such technology, particularly the gravitational manipulation systems used in attack moon propulsion, eventually secured the commitment of several Skitarii cohorts, and most significantly elements from Legio Ignatum, the Fire Wasps, a Titan legion with extensive anti-Ork combat experience. The involvement of Titans represented a significant escalation in the mission's profile and resource commitment. Warlord-class Titans stood among the Imperium's most valuable military assets, irreplaceable war machines whose deployment required authorization at the highest levels. The commitment of three such engines, Dominatus Victrix, Metallus Sebrenia, and Praetor Imperialis, along with their Reaver and Warhound escorts, demonstrated the operation's priority status within Imperial strategic planning. Transportation of these forces presented its own logistical challenges. The mission required a delicate balance between combat power and stealth capability. Too large a fleet would be detected long before reaching Ullener Prime. Too small, and it would lack the firepower needed once engaged. The solution came from an unexpected source. Vanguard proposed utilizing captured Ork vessels, specifically those taken during the Proletarian Crusade's limited successful engagements, modified with Imperial technology, but maintaining their external Orkish appearance. Mechanicus tech priests, overcoming their doctrinal revulsion at working with Xeno's technology, began the painstaking process of retrofitting these vessels with Imperial control systems while preserving their outward greenskin characteristics. The work proceeded in sealed docks orbiting Jupiter, with all personnel subject to stringent security protocols to prevent knowledge of the operation spreading beyond those with direct involvement. The intelligence requirements for the mission extended beyond mere force composition and transportation. The strike force needed detailed information about Ullanr Prime's defenses, the beast's command structure, and most importantly, the leader's personal habits and protective measures. Here, the Officio Assassinorum's specialized capabilities proved invaluable. Vanguard committed assets from multiple temples to the intelligence-gathering phase. Calidus assassins infiltrated Ork-held worlds in the Empire's outer rings, using their polymorphine abilities to assume the forms of human collaborators and access information networks. Vanus Temple operatives intercepted and decoded Ork communications, gradually assembling a comprehensive picture of the Empire's command and control systems. Most daringly, a Vindicare assassin team established an observation post on one of Ullanr Prime's moons, maintaining constant surveillance of the beast's fortress for 73 days before executing a high-risk extraction. The intelligence these operations yielded painted a sobering picture of the challenge ahead. Ullanr Prime's defenses exceeded even the most pessimistic Imperial estimates. The planet's surface bristled with weapon emplacements ranging from conventional artillery to gravity manipulation, devices similar to those deployed on attack moons. Void shields of unprecedented scale protected key installations, powered by geothermal energy tapped from the planet's core through massive bore shafts visible from orbit. The beast's personal fortress dominated the same plane where the Emperor had celebrated his victory millennia earlier, another deliberate symbolic choice. The structure defied conventional architectural categorization, combining elements of defensive fortification, industrial complex, and religious shrine in a massive edifice that stretched kilometers across and burrowed deep into the planet's crust. Surrounding it stood hundreds of gargants and mega-gargants, many larger than Imperial Titans, arranged in concentric defensive rings. Most concerning were the beast's personal guards, Orks of enormous size and sophistication, each equivalent to a Space Marine captain in combat capability, equipped with technology that incorporated both typical Orkish brutality and surprising technological refinement. These weren't the mindless brutes of conventional Ork forces, but disciplined warriors with apparent tactical acumen and coordinated fighting techniques. The mission's command structure reflected its complex, multi-faceted nature. Overall strategic authority rested with Courland, whose position as the last son of Dorn gave him unique authority across the successor chapters. Tactical command during the approach phase would fall to Lord Admiral Lansung, whose experience with void combat operations made him the logical choice despite political considerations. Once planetside, command would transfer to Grand Master Bohemond of the Black Templars, whose extensive experience in assault operations most closely matched the mission's requirements. The Mechanicus contingent, including the Titan Legion elements, would operate under nominal Imperial command but maintain their traditional operational autonomy, with Archmagos Dominus Call serving as their senior representative. This arrangement, while not ideal from a unity of command perspective, represented the political realities of an Imperium where the Mechanicus maintained its independence even during existential crises. Final mission planning occurred aboard the Phalanx, with representatives from all participating forces gathered in the Star Fortress's main stratageum. The massive space, designed to accommodate hundreds of officers during Legion-era operations, felt cavernous with its reduced complement, a visual reminder of how the Imperium's military capabilities had diminished since the Great Crusade. The operation would proceed in 4 distinct phases. First, the approach, utilizing the captured and modified Ork vessels, the strike force would infiltrate the Ullener system using designated approach vectors identified through Assassinorum intelligence. These routes exploited gaps in the beast's sensor network, allowing the fleet to reach near orbital positions before detection became inevitable. The second phase, insertion, would deploy ground forces to 3 primary landing zones surrounding the beast's fortress. These locations provided both tactical advantages for subsequent advances and natural features that would help shield the landing forces from initial detection. The Elysian drop troops would secure these LZs, eliminating perimeter defenses before the main force arrived via drop pod and landing craft. Phase 3 encompassed the main assault on the fortress itself. Here, the plan relied heavily on Astartes' shock tactics supported by precision Titan strikes against key defensive positions. The Fist's exemplar breachers would create entry points through the fortress's outer walls, allowing Black Templar assault teams to penetrate the structure's interior, while Crimson Fist's veterans provided tactical flexibility to respond to unexpected developments. The final phase, target elimination, remained the most uncertain. Intelligence on the beast's personal capabilities remained fragmentary despite the Assassinorum's best efforts. The creature's size, strength, and potential psychic abilities could only be estimated from limited observational data and the accounts of survivors from previous encounters with beast-class orcs. The elimination team, comprised of the most experienced warriors from each participating chapter, would need to adapt to conditions on the ground once the beast was actually engaged. Resource allocation for the operation stripped strategic reserves throughout the segmentum solar. The commitment of 3 warlord titans alone represented an irreplaceable concentration of firepower that would leave other sectors vulnerable during their absence. Ammunition expenditures for the projected 3-day operation exceeded the annual allocation for multiple subsectors. The specialized equipment required, from melta charges designed to breach orc fortifications to modified power weapons calibrated for optimal effectiveness against beast-class orc physiology, depleted Forge World production capacity for months. The scale of this commitment reflected the operation's existential importance. If successful, the decapitation strike against the beast would disrupt the unprecedented coordination that made his forces so lethal, potentially causing the Orc Empire to fragment into more manageable components that could be defeated in detail. If unsuccessful, the Imperium would have expended irreplaceable resources and elite forces, leaving Terra even more vulnerable to subsequent attack moon assaults. As final preparations neared completion, Corland addressed the assembled command staff aboard the Phalanx. The last son of Dorn stood before the massive viewing port that dominated the stratageum's forward wall, the stars beyond serving as backdrop to his unadorned power armor. The symbolism wasn't lost on those present. One Astartes, the sole survivor of his chapter, now leading the greatest imperial military operation since the heresy against an enemy that had already demonstrated its ability to annihilate entire chapters. The strategic dilemma facing Corland and the imperial leadership grew more complex with each passing day. Intelligence reports from the Officio Assassinorum's observation teams confirmed what many had feared. The beast's fortress on Ullener Prime represented a defensive challenge beyond anything Imperial forces had encountered since the Siege of Terra itself. Preliminary analysis suggested that even with the combined might of the Last Wall, the Titan legions, and supporting Imperial Guard regiments, a frontal assault would result in catastrophic casualties with minimal chance of success. During a closed strategic session aboard the Phalanx, Archmagos Urquidex presented hololithic projections of the fortress defenses based on the latest intelligence. The structure incorporated concentric rings of fortifications, each designed to channel attackers into pre-sighted killing zones covered by overlapping fields of fire. Power generation facilities buried deep beneath the surface powered void shields of unprecedented scale, rendering orbital bombardment ineffective. Most concerning were the gravity weapons mounted throughout the complex, scaled-down versions of the technology used on attack moons, capable of crushing even Terminator-armored Astartes into unrecognizable masses of ceramite and flesh. These defenses exceed standard Imperial fortification templates by approximately 78.3%, Ork Waaagh stated, his mechanical voice betraying no emotion despite the gravity of his assessment. Conventional siege warfare algorithms project casualty rates of 94.7% before reaching the inner sanctum where the beast is believed to reside. The assembled commanders absorbed this information in grim silence. Grand Master Bohemond of the Black Templars finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of combat experience. We require specialized knowledge, siege warfare expertise beyond what we currently possess. Courland nodded, having already reached the same conclusion. The Imperial fists and their successors, while skilled in defensive operations, lacked the comprehensive understanding of offensive siege warfare needed for this operation. That knowledge had resided primarily with one legion, the Iron Warriors, who had turned traitor during the heresy and now dwelled in the Eye of Terror as sworn enemies of the Imperium. There may be a solution, Vangorich said, his words carefully measured. Our intelligence networks have identified an Iron Warriors warband operating near the Cadian Gate. Their leader, Warsmith Calcator, has demonstrated tactical patterns, suggesting he retains the Legion's pre-heresy expertise in siege warfare. The temperature in the stratagem seemed to drop several degrees. Bohemond's hand moved instinctively to his weapon, while several other Astartes commanders muttered prayers of contempt. Collaboration with traitors represented the ultimate taboo, a line that the Imperium had maintained inviolate since the heresy's aftermath. Vangorich continued, unfazed by the reaction. Calcator's warband has engaged primarily in raids against Xeno's holdings, rather than Imperial targets for the past 3 decades. Psychological assessment suggests pragmatism rather than ideological commitment to chaos. He might be amenable to negotiation under specific circumstances. The debate that followed tested the limits of Imperial doctrine and Astartes brotherhood. Chaplain Benedictus of the Black Templars vehemently opposed any contact with traitors, citing numerous scriptural passages condemning such collaboration. Techmarine Jeremiah countered with historical precedent isolated instances during the Scouring where Imperial forces had temporarily aligned with former traitors against greater threats, though such alliances remained classified at the highest levels. Courland listened to these arguments with the patience his position demanded, but his mind had already begun calculating the practical considerations. The Iron Warriors possessed exactly the knowledge the Imperium needed, not just theoretical understanding, but practical experience in overcoming the most formidable defensive works ever constructed. Their expertise had nearly broken the Imperial palace during the Siege of Terra. That same expertise might now be turned against the beast's fortress. The question isn't whether we should seek this knowledge, Courland finally stated, silencing the ongoing debate. The question is whether we can obtain it without compromising our mission or our souls. We require parameters, strict limitations on any interaction with these traitors. Vangorich nodded, having anticipated this response. My Calidus agents can establish initial contact through intermediaries, presenting the opportunity as a matter of pragmatic self-interest rather than imperial desperation. Calcator's warband faces resource constraints that we could temporarily alleviate in exchange for specific tactical insights. The parameters Courland established were non-negotiable: no direct combat cooperation between loyalist and traitor forces, information exchange only, conducted through secured Vox channels with multiple verification protocols, and absolutely no exposure of traitor elements to sensitive Imperial technology or command structures. Most importantly, once the beast was defeated, standard Imperial protocols regarding traitors would immediately resume. There would be no amnesty, no forgiveness for past treachery. Contacting Calcator proved simpler than expected. The Iron Warriors Warsmith maintained a network of mortal agents throughout the sectors bordering the Eye of Terror, primarily for intelligence gathering and resource acquisition. Vangorich's operatives located one such agent on the frontier world of Hydrafer, a former naval quartermaster who supplied the warband with specialized materials unavailable within the Eye. The initial message was crafted with meticulous care, a technical query regarding theoretical approaches to certain fortification systems, presented as an academic exercise rather than operational planning. Calcater's response came 3 weeks later, delivered by a merchant vessel whose captain remained unaware of the data slate concealed within his legitimate cargo. The warsmith's reply demonstrated both his expertise and his awareness of the message's true purpose. "Your theoretical fortress bears striking resemblance to Orkish construction patterns I've observed near the Cadian Gate," Calcater wrote. "Such defenses require specialized approaches not found in standard Imperial tactical doctrines. Further consultation would necessitate more direct communication channels and appropriate compensation for my technical services. Establishing these more direct communication channels required technological heresy of a subtle kind. Techmarine Jeremiah, working with selected Mechanicus adepts sworn to absolute secrecy, constructed a modified Vox array aboard an unmarked system runner, a small, fast vessel capable of rapid transit between designated coordinates. This array incorporated encryption algorithms dating back to the Great Crusade, designed to prevent interception while maintaining plausible deniability should the communications be discovered. The first direct exchange between Courland and Calcater occurred 54 days after the initial contact. The warsmith's voice came through the specialized Vox array with surprising clarity, his tone matter-of-fact despite the unprecedented nature of their conversation. "I understand your situation better than you might expect, last son of Dorn," Calcater began, the traditional enmity between their gene lines evident despite the professional delivery. "The beast represents a threat to all human-controlled space, including those regions where my warband operates. I'm prepared to provide tactical consultation regarding his fortress defenses, but my price extends beyond material compensation." That price proved complicated. Calcater demanded access to certain archaeotech components available only through Mechanicus sources, ostensibly for Void Shield research. More problematically, he requested the elimination of a rival Iron Warriors warband operating in the Belial system, a group he claimed had fallen to true chaos worship rather than maintaining the Legion's traditional pragmatism. Most significantly, he wanted a temporary suspension of Imperial pursuit against his forces, creating a designated operational area where his warband could function without constant evasive actions. The negotiations stretched over weeks, conducted through the secure Vox channel with increasing frankness as both sides recognized the practical necessity of their arrangement. Vangorich handled the details with the cold calculation that made him such an effective Grand Master of Assassins, while Courland focused on the technical information that represented the Alliance's true purpose. Calcater's insights proved immediately valuable. The warsmith identified critical vulnerabilities in the beast's fortress design that had escaped Imperial analysis, power distribution nodes that, if targeted precisely, would create cascading failures in the Void Shield network, structural weaknesses in the lower fortification levels resulting from the Orks' accelerated construction methods, and most importantly, a comprehensive understanding of how the gravity weapons were integrated into the defensive layout. "The Orks have replicated technology they don't truly understand," Calcater explained during one exchange, his voice carrying the professional respect of one siege engineer for another's work. "They've created impressive weapons, but their implementation lacks sophistication. The gravity projectors require massive power inputs channeled through relatively exposed conduits. Target these conduits with melta charges at these coordinates, and you'll neutralize entire sections of their defensive grid." The technical information Calcater provided underwent rigorous verification by Mechanicus analysts before being incorporated into operational planning. Archmagos Waaagh personally reviewed the warsmith's recommendations, comparing them against known Iron Warrior siege patterns from historical records. His conclusion, delivered to Courland in private, confirmed both the information's accuracy and its critical importance. "The trader's analysis appears sound," Waaagh acknowledged, his mechadendrites twitching with evident discomfort at the admission. Implementing his recommended approach would reduce projected casualty rates by approximately 47.3% and increase mission success probability by similar margins. As valuable as this technical information proved, the ethical implications of the arrangement created deepening fractures within the Imperial command structure. When knowledge of the Iron Warriors' consultation inevitably leaked beyond the initial planning group, the backlash threatened the operation's foundations. Chaplain Benedictus formally requested Corlin's censure by the ecclesiarchy for trafficking with the archenemy, while several Imperial Guard officers submitted their resignations rather than participate in an operation tainted by traitor input. Vangorich managed these political complications with his characteristic blend of persuasion and threat, but the underlying tension remained. The Imperium had maintained its moral clarity through absolute rejection of chaos and all who served it. This pragmatic compromise, however necessary, eroded that clarity at a fundamental level. Some among the command staff whispered that defeating the beast through such means might represent a Pyrrhic victory, preserving the Imperium's physical existence while compromising its spiritual foundation. Corland understood these concerns, but remained focused on the practical imperatives. The beast represented an immediate existential threat that had already demonstrated its ability to strike at Terra itself. Theoretical moral hazards paled in comparison to the very real possibility of humanity's extinction should the Ork Empire continue its expansion unchecked. He would bear the weight of this decision and its consequences, just as he bore the legacy of the Imperial Fists alone. The final phase of consultation with Calcator focused on assault sequencing, the precise order in which the beast's defenses should be engaged to create maximum disruption with minimum exposure to counterattack. The Warsmith provided detailed templates based on Iron Warriors' operations during the Great Crusade, when they had overcome Xeno's fortifications of comparable scale. These templates included specialized breaching techniques, optimal formation configurations for assault teams, and timing coordinates calibrated to exploit the predictable response patterns of automated defense systems. The Orks have incorporated elements of human fortress design, Calcator noted during their final exchange. This suggests they've studied Imperial defensive doctrine, possibly through captured materials or observation of our fortifications. They're learning from us, adapting our strengths to their purposes. An unsettling development, wouldn't you agree? This observation proved more significant than initially apparent. If the Orks were deliberately studying and incorporating human military techniques, it suggested a level of strategic analysis unprecedented in Greenskin history. The beast wasn't simply a more powerful Ork warboss, but a fundamentally different kind of leader, one capable of recognizing and adapting to the strengths of his enemies rather than relying solely on overwhelming force. As the operational planning neared completion, incorporating Calcator's insights throughout the assault sequence, Vangorich raised the question that had lingered unspoken. What if the Warsmith's information contained deliberate errors designed to lead Imperial forces into disaster? The Iron Warriors' hatred for the Imperial Fists and their successors was legendary. The opportunity to eliminate the last genetic legacy of Rogel Dorn might prove too tempting for Calcator to resist, regardless of the pragmatic benefits of their temporary alliance. Corland had anticipated this concern from the beginning. Each element of Calcator's tactical advice had been independently verified through multiple channels, including historical archives, mechanicus analysis, and field testing where possible. More importantly, the operational plan incorporated contingencies for potential betrayal, alternative assault routes, reserve forces positioned to respond to unexpected resistance, and most critically, a deliberate policy of information compartmentalization that ensured Calcator received only carefully selected details about the actual assault force composition and timing. "We're using his knowledge," Corland explained to the command staff, "not trusting his intentions." The Iron Warriors' expertise in siege warfare is unquestionable. Their loyalty is non-existent. We extract what we need while protecting ourselves from inevitable betrayal. That betrayal came sooner than expected. 3 days before the assault force was scheduled to depart for Ulanor, Officio Assassinorum surveillance detected unusual Vox traffic from systems near the designated rendezvous point where Calcator was to receive his promised Archaeotech components. Analysis indicated the Warsmith had deployed elements of his fleet in attack formation, apparently planning to ambush the Imperial supply vessel and sees not just the agreed-upon materials, but the ship itself. Vangorich presented this intelligence to Courland with characteristic directness. He's moving earlier than anticipated. Our psychological profile suggested he would wait until after the beast's defeat before turning against us, when our forces would be depleted from the campaign. Courland absorbed this information without visible reaction. Has he compromised operational security? No evidence of that, Vangorich confirmed. His movements suggest a simple opportunistic grab for additional resources rather than a coordinated strike against our main force. Standard traitor behavior, unable to maintain even pragmatic cooperation when opportunity presents itself. The response Courland authorized demonstrated why the Iron Warrior's betrayal had been anticipated from the beginning. The supply vessel Calcator, expected to ambush, arrived at the rendezvous point as scheduled, but its cargo holds contain not Archaeotech components, but a Culexus assassin and a modified cyclonic torpedo with a localized blast radius. When the Warsmith's boarding parties breached the vessel's hull, they found only death, while the resulting detonation crippled his flagship and scattered his accompanying escorts. The Imperial assault force translated into the Ullener system with calculated precision, emerging from the warp at carefully plotted coordinates that minimized detection probability. The modified Ork vessels, their hulls still bearing the crude iconography and haphazard construction typical of greenskin craft, drifted on minimal power, maintaining the illusion of a returning raiding party rather than the spearhead of humanity's most critical military operation in centuries. Courland observed the tactical display aboard the command deck of the lead vessel, a converted Ork cruiser designated Trojan Alpha for the operation. The massive view screens displayed Ullener Prime growing steadily larger, a world transformed since the Emperor's triumph millennia earlier, where Imperial records described a relatively standard habitable planet with moderate Ork infestation, now stood a fortress world of staggering proportions. Continent-sized industrial complexes covered much of the visible landmass, belching toxic fumes into an atmosphere already thick with pollutants. Orbital defense platforms formed concentric rings around the planet, their weapons currently dormant, but clearly capable of obliterating conventional attack fleets. The first phase proceeded with greater success than even the most optimistic projections. The Beast's orbital security forces accepted the incoming vessel's identification codes, obtained through Assassinorum intelligence operations, without challenge. This initial penetration allowed the Imperial fleet to establish position within the planet's upper atmosphere, using the perpetual smog layer for concealment as they dispersed toward designated insertion points. Complications arose during the second phase as atmospheric turbulence exceeded predicted parameters, forcing adjustments to drop trajectories for the Astartes assault teams. Captain Thane of the Fist's Exemplar, commanding the primary insertion force, compensated with characteristic precision, recalculating impact coordinates to maintain convergence on the primary target despite the navigational difficulties. The drop pod struck Ullener's surface with synchronized impacts, disgorging their Astartes passengers into pre-designated assembly zones hidden within the sprawling industrial wasteland surrounding the Beast's central fortress. The ground phase revealed the first major deviation from intelligence assessments. Ork defensive concentrations proved significantly heavier than expected, with multiple layers of sentries and automated detection systems covering approaches that reconnaissance had identified as relatively unguarded. Thane's forces encountered the first of these defensive screens 3 kilometers from their intended assembly point, a network of sensor towers linked to buried explosive devices that would have decimated conventional forces attempting passage. Astartes' adaptability proved decisive in this initial engagement. Techmarine Gorth of the Crimson Fists identified the sensor network's control frequencies and implemented a localized jamming field that created a temporary blind spot in the defensive coverage. Through this gap, assault teams advanced in staggered formation, maintaining Vox silence and utilizing the noise of nearby industrial machinery to mask their movement sounds. The first direct engagement with Beast-class Orks occurred at the perimeter of the primary industrial complex. These weren't the common greenskin warriors familiar to Imperial forces, but specialized guard units standing nearly 3 meters tall, their enhanced musculature supported by crude but effective exoskeletons. Their weapons combined typical Orkish brutality with surprising technological sophistication, graviton projectors that could crush power armor through localized gravity distortion, and sonic disruptors that targeted the enhanced hearing of Astartes. The Black Templars' assault cadre, led by Chaplain Benedictus, engaged these guards with characteristic zealous fury. Their charge closed distance before the graviton weapons could establish targeting locks, bringing the engagement to close quarters combat where Astartes' superiority in melee could negate the Orks' technological advantages. Even here, however, the Beast's guards demonstrated combat prowess exceeding standard greenskin parameters. They fought with coordinated defensive positions rather than the typical Ork tendency toward individual glory seeking, maintaining interlocking fields of fire and systematically targeting Astartes' officers. Casualties mounted as the Imperial forces pushed through these outer defenses. The Crimson Fists lost 17 veterans in the first hour of engagement, while the Black Templars suffered 23 battle brothers wounded severely enough to compromise combat effectiveness. The Fists Exemplar, operating as the strategic reserve, committed additional squads to reinforce breaching points where resistance proved heaviest. The operation's true turning point came with the arrival of the Titan elements. 3 Warlord-class engines, Dominatus Victrix, Metallus Sebrenia, and Praetor Imperialis, made planetfall 6 kilometers from the primary target, their massive void shields absorbing defensive fire that would have annihilated lesser vehicles. Their arrival forced a significant redeployment of Ork forces, drawing defensive assets away from the sectors where Astartes' teams were making their primary advance. Princeps Maximus Hecaton of Dominatus Victrix coordinated the Titan advance with methodical precision, utilizing the tactical insights provided through the Iron Warriors consultation. The massive war machines targeted power distribution nodes identified in Calcater's analysis, their volcano cannons and plasma destructors systematically eliminating key infrastructure, supporting the fortress's void shield network. Each precision strike created cascading failures through connected systems, gradually degrading the seemingly impenetrable defensive screens, protecting the Beast's inner sanctum. The Ork response revealed another aspect of their evolution under the Beast's leadership. Rather than the disorganized counterattacks typical of greenskin forces, carefully coordinated reserve elements deployed from concealed bunkers throughout the industrial complex. These included not just infantry formations, but massive war machines, gargants and mega-gargants that rivaled Imperial Titans in scale and firepower. Unlike the crude approximations of previous encounters, these engines incorporated sophisticated targeting systems and void shield technology that matched their Imperial counterparts. The ensuing Titan battle transformed the landscape for kilometers around. Dominatus Victrix engaged the lead mega-gargant directly, both massive war machines exchanging apocalyptic firepower that vaporized surrounding structures and created lakes of molten metal where industrial facilities had stood moments before. Metallus Sebrenia provided covering fire, its turbo-laser destructor targeting the Ork machine's knee joints while avoiding its surprisingly effective void shields. Praetor Imperialis maintained a wider firing pattern, suppressing smaller gargants that attempted to flank the Imperial formation. While this titanic engagement dominated the battlefield visually, the operation's critical progress occurred elsewhere. Taking advantage of the distraction provided by the Titan battle, Thane led a specialized assault team through maintenance tunnels identified in Calcater's analysis. These passages, originally designed for servicing the fortress's massive power generators, provided access to the central structure while bypassing multiple defensive layers. The team included veterans from all participating chapters, each selected for specific skills relevant to the infiltration mission. The tunnels presented their own unique hazards. Automated security systems, more sophisticated than expected from Ork technology, deployed lethal countermeasures including radiation floods, toxic gas releases, and localized gravity fluctuations that could crush even Terminator armor. Techmarine Jeremiah neutralized these systems sequentially, applying knowledge gained from the Iron Warrior's insights to identify control junctions and implement overrides. The team's first indication that they approached something unusual came when the tunnel architecture changed dramatically. The crude industrial construction gave way to structures of remarkable sophistication, archways precisely carved from single pieces of adamantium-like material, walls bearing intricate circuit-like patterns that pulsed with energy, and atmosphere processors that maintained environmental conditions significantly different from the rest of the fortress. This architectural shift coincided with the first appearance of a new orc subspecies, smaller than typical warriors, but with grotesquely enlarged cranial structures and atrophied physical bodies. These brain boys, as they were designated in subsequent imperial classification, appeared to serve command and control functions rather than direct combat roles. They coordinated defensive responses through unknown means, possibly low-level psychic communication, directing larger warrior variants with precise tactical instructions. Thane's team eliminated these command units with priority targeting, creating temporary disruption in the defensive coordination. This tactical window allowed them to penetrate deeper into the fortress complex, approaching what intelligence had identified as the beast's personal chambers. The resistance intensified with each level they descended, with specialized orc guards demonstrating increasingly sophisticated tactics and equipment. The final approach to the beast's inner sanctum revealed the most significant intelligence failure of the operation. Rather than a single command center, the team encountered 6 separate chambers arranged in a hexagonal pattern, each containing what appeared to be a beast-class orc of extraordinary proportions. These creatures stood over 5 meters tall, their massive frames enhanced with cybernetic components that blurred the line between biology and technology. Each appeared physically distinct from the others, one heavily augmented with mechanical components focused on technical functions, another bearing specialized communication apparatus, a third displaying obvious signs of enhanced psychic capability. Corland, who had joined Thane's infiltration team despite objections from the command staff, immediately recognized the strategic implications. The beast wasn't a single entity, but a collective leadership, specialized aspects of orc capability, divided among multiple bodies, but functioning as a unified command structure. This explained the unprecedented coordination demonstrated by orc forces throughout the campaign. They were directed not by a single mind, but by a specialized command group with distributed capabilities. The assault team split into 6 elements, each targeting one of the beast aspects simultaneously to prevent coordinated response. Corland personally led the attack against what appeared to be the primary war leader, a massive orc whose armor incorporated trophies from fallen Imperial forces, including recognizable components from Imperial Fist's power armor taken at Ardamantua. The engagement that followed tested the limits of even Astartes' combat capability. Each beast aspect demonstrated fighting skills and tactical awareness far beyond normal orc parameters. The technical specialist deployed automated defense systems that targeted weak points in Astartes' armor with unnerving precision. The psychic variant generated disruptive energy fields that interfered with targeting systems and created localized warp distortions that disoriented attackers. The war leader fought with both brutal strength and surprising finesse, wielding a massive power claw that could shear through Terminator armor while coordinating with the other aspects through some form of Gestalt consciousness. Casualties mounted rapidly as the specialized assault teams engaged their targets. The Black Templars lost 3 sword brethren in the first minute of engagement with the psychic beast, their neural systems overloaded by directed warp energy that bypassed their armor's protective systems. The Crimson Fist's team suffered similar losses against the technical specialist, whose defensive automata deployed targeted radiation weapons that penetrated ceramite through microscopic stress fractures. Corland's confrontation with the war leader proved the most costly. The massive orc demonstrated combat skills that suggested centuries of experience, anticipating standard Astartes attack patterns and countering with devastating precision. 3 veterans of the Fist's exemplar fell in rapid succession, their armor crushed by the beast's power claw or torn apart by the energy field surrounding its massive frame. The tide began to turn when Thane implemented specialized tactics developed through the Iron Warriors consultation. Rather than engaging each beast aspect directly, the teams adjusted to target support systems within each chamber, power conduits, environmental regulators, and most importantly, the subtle interconnections between the 6 entities. Techmarine Jeremiah identified a pattern of energy transfers between the chambers, suggesting the beast aspects shared computational resources or possibly some form of collective consciousness distributed across multiple bodies. Disrupting these connections created immediate effects. The beast aspects' movements became less coordinated, their tactical responses degrading from seamless cooperation to more individualized actions. This degradation allowed the assault teams to isolate and neutralize each entity sequentially, concentrating force against targets of opportunity rather than attempting to overcome all 6 simultaneously. The war leader, recognizing the strategy, attempted to withdraw to a secondary command center buried deeper within the fortress. Corlund pursued alone, following the massive orc through access corridors barely large enough to accommodate its frame. The chase ended in a massive chamber dominated by technology of clearly non-orcish origin, artifacts that appeared to predate even Imperial classification systems, possibly remnants of the ancient civilization that had originally created the orc species as weapons. Here, Corlund confronted the beast in single combat, the last son of Dorn against the apex of orc evolution. The duel pushed both combatants to their physical limits. Corlund's power sword, a relic dating back to the Great Crusade, scored multiple wounds against the beast's reinforced hide, while the orc's attacks gradually degraded the Imperial Fist's armor systems. Warning runes flashed across Corlund's display as joint servos failed and life support functions operated at minimal capacity. The decisive moment came when Corlund identified a pattern in the beast's attack sequences, a momentary vulnerability when the creature shifted its massive power claw from offensive to defensive positioning. Exploiting this opening, Corlund drove his sword directly into a junction between the orc's natural musculature and cybernetic enhancement. The blade penetrated critical systems, causing cascading failures through the beast's augmetic components. Even mortally wounded, the beast demonstrated the terrifying resilience typical of its species. Its counterattack caught Corlund mid-withdrawal, the power claw closing around the Astartes' torso with crushing force. Ceramite cracked, internal organ systems ruptured, and critical neural connections severed as the beast expended its final strength in one devastating grip. Both combatants collapsed simultaneously, the beast from catastrophic system failure, Corlund from injuries that exceeded even his enhanced physiology's capacity to sustain life. The last son of Dorn died as he had lived, in service to the Imperium he had sworn to protect, his final act ensuring the destruction of humanity's greatest Xenos threat since the Great Crusade. Thane's team, having neutralized the remaining beast aspects, discovered Corlund's body beside the massive corpse of the war leader. The symbolism wasn't lost on the assembled Astartes. The final Imperial fist and the beast had eliminated each other, bringing a symmetry to the conflict that had begun with the near destruction of Dorn's legacy at Artamantua. With the beast leadership neutralized, the operation entered its final phase. Explosive charges placed at critical structural points throughout the fortress complex detonated in carefully timed sequence, collapsing the massive structure into its foundation and burying the ancient technology it contained beneath millions of tons of rubble. Simultaneously, the Titan battle group completed its systematic destruction of the surrounding industrial infrastructure, eliminating the production capacity that had sustained the beast's war machine. The death of Corlund and the beast marked not an ending, but a transition in the Imperium's long history. As Imperial forces withdrew from the shattered remains of Ullanr, leaving behind monitoring stations and automated sentinels to ensure the greenskin threat remained neutralized, the political apparatus on Terra began the painful process of reconstitution. The beheading had left the High Lords decimated, creating a power vacuum at the heart of Imperial governance that demanded immediate attention. Draken Vangorich, having coordinated the war effort from Terra while maintaining what remained of the Imperial administrative structure, found himself uniquely positioned to shape the Imperium's recovery. the Grand Master of Assassins, possessed both the practical authority derived from his intact command structure and the intelligence assets necessary to identify potential threats to stability during the transition period. What began as temporary emergency management gradually solidified into something more permanent as Vangorich systematically consolidated his influence among the surviving imperial institutions. The selection of replacement High Lords proceeded under Vangorich's careful supervision. Each candidate underwent extensive background investigation by Vannis Temple operatives, ensuring loyalty to imperial interests rather than personal or factional agendas. Those with connections to the failed Proletarian Crusade or who had opposed the Last Wall Protocol found themselves quietly sidelined, their positions filled by administrators who understood their advancement depended entirely on Vangorich's continued approval. This process created a Senatorum Imperialis superficially identical to its predecessor, but fundamentally different in its power dynamics. The new High Lords maintained the appearance of independent authority while understanding the reality of their situation. They served at Vangorich's pleasure, and their decisions required his tacit approval before implementation. This arrangement functioned effectively during the immediate post-war period, allowing rapid response to ongoing crises without the bureaucratic deadlock that had hampered the previous administration. The first major reform implemented under this new governance structure addressed the military vulnerabilities exposed during the conflict. The Death Watch, originally formed as specialized reconnaissance units during the war, received formal codification as a permanent institution dedicated to monitoring Xenos threats throughout Imperial space. Unlike traditional Astartes chapters bound to specific territories or Crusade objectives, Deathwatch Marines would operate across jurisdictional boundaries, drawing members from all loyal chapters to create teams with diverse tactical capabilities. This institutionalization represented a significant departure from pre-war doctrine. The Deathwatch's operational mandate explicitly acknowledged that Xenos species could pose existential threats requiring specialized countermeasures beyond conventional military response. Each watch fortress established following the war contained extensive biological research facilities, weapons testing ranges calibrated for specific Xenos physiologies, and archival systems dedicated to preserving knowledge that might otherwise be suppressed as dangerous or heretical. Complementing the Deathwatch's formation was a comprehensive restructuring of Imperial defense doctrine. The Beasts campaign had demonstrated the vulnerability of isolated worlds dependent on distant battle fleets for protection. Under Vangorich's direction, the Departamento Munitorum implemented standardized planetary defense protocols throughout Segmentum Solar, establishing minimum requirements for orbital platforms, ground-based weapon systems, and militia training programs. Compliance inspections, conducted by specialized teams answering directly to Terra rather than sector governors, ensured these standards were maintained even on worlds previously exempted from such requirements due to political connections. The Adeptus Mechanicus underwent its own transformation following the conflict. The technological sophistication displayed by the Beast's forces had shaken the Mechanicus hierarchy's confidence in their doctrinal superiority. Fabricator General Kubik authorized unprecedented research initiatives focused on understanding and countering advanced Xenos technology, particularly the gravitational manipulation systems that had made the attack moons so devastating. These projects operated under special dispensation from normal restrictions on technological innovation, justified by military necessity rather than pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. Perhaps most significant were the reforms implemented within the Astartes command structure. The Last Wall Protocol, having proven its value during the crisis, received formal incorporation into Imperial strategic doctrine. Each successor chapter of the Imperial Fists accepted codified responsibilities for maintaining communication networks, compatible equipment standards, and regular joint training exercises that would facilitate rapid integration during future emergencies. This model eventually expanded to other Primarch successor chapters, creating regional defense clusters throughout Imperial space that could respond to threats more effectively than individual chapters operating in isolation. The Imperial Fists themselves underwent rebirth through an unprecedented procedure. With Corlin's death, the chapter had technically ceased to exist, its gene seed, traditions, and institutional knowledge lost with its final battle brother. Vangorich, recognizing the symbolic importance of maintaining Rogaldorn's legacy, authorized the collection of progenitor glands from the Imperial Fist successor chapters. These genetic materials, combined with archived samples maintained in Terra's vaults, allowed the reconstitution of the chapter under the leadership of Maximus Thane, formerly of the Fist's exemplar. This genetic reconstitution established a precedent that would influence chapter restoration protocols for millennia afterward. The procedure demonstrated that even when catastrophic casualties threatened a chapter's existence, the distributed gene seed among successor chapters could preserve the Primarch's lineage. This redundancy provided resilience to the Astartes institution that had previously been theoretical rather than demonstrated in practice. While these reforms strengthened the Imperium militarily, Vangorich's political consolidation continued with methodical precision. The Officio Assassinorum expanded its surveillance networks throughout Terra and key Imperial worlds, creating an intelligence apparatus that provided the Grand Master with information unavailable even to the High Lords. Potential opposition figures found themselves subjected to increasing scrutiny, their communications monitored, and their associates investigated for possible disloyalty. For approximately 8 years following the Beast's defeat, this arrangement maintained a functional, if authoritarian, stability. Imperial worlds received more responsive governance than they had experienced in centuries, with administrative inefficiencies systematically eliminated and corrupt officials removed with unprecedented efficiency. Military readiness improved throughout the Segmentum Solar, while trade routes benefited from enhanced protection against both human and Xenos predation. The breaking point came when Vangorich's control mechanisms began extending into areas traditionally protected from central authority. His attempts to implement surveillance within Mechanicus Forge complexes met resistance from tech priests protective of their institutional independence. Similarly, his directives regarding ecclesiarchy doctrine, specifically modifications to Imperial Creed teachings about Xenos threats, created tension with religious authorities accustomed to theological autonomy. These institutional conflicts might have been resolved through negotiation had Vangorich maintained the political flexibility that characterized his early leadership. Instead, the Grand Master interpreted resistance as disloyalty, potential opposition as actual threat. His perspective, shaped by decades commanding an organization dedicated to elimination rather than compromise, increasingly viewed imperial governance as a zero-sum competition where alternate power centers represented inherent dangers to stability. The event that history would record as the second beheading began with little warning. During a scheduled meeting of the High Lords in the year 546 of the 32nd millennium, Vangorich entered the Senatorum chamber, accompanied by a full execution team drawn from multiple assassin temples. The Grand Master had apparently concluded that the existing High Lords, despite their previous compliance, harbored ambitions that threatened his governance model. Without formal charges or public explanation, Vangorich ordered their immediate execution. 11 of the 12 High Lords died within minutes, their enhanced bodyguards proving ineffective against assassins specifically trained to eliminate protected targets. Only the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes escaped, his transhuman physiology and centuries of combat experience allowing him to fight clear of the ambush. His subsequent withdrawal to the Imperial Palace's inner sanctums removed the final institutional check on Vangorich's authority. With the High Lords eliminated, Vangorich dispensed with the pretense of constitutional governance. Rather than appointing replacements, he established direct rule through Officio Assassinorum command structures, with Vannis Temple coordinators assuming control of key administrative departments. Planetary governors received directives bearing Vangorich's personal seal rather than Senatorum authorization, while military commanders found their chains of command redirected through assessment teams staffed by operatives from various assassin temples. This direct rule continued for nearly a century, creating what Imperial historians would later term the Assassin's Regency. Vangorich's governance during this period displayed both remarkable efficiency and disturbing disregard for traditional imperial values. Administrative corruption declined to levels unseen since the Great Crusade, with Calidus agents eliminating officials who accepted even minor bribes or engaged in resource misallocation. Military readiness remained at heightened levels throughout the Segmentum Solar, with regular compliance inspections ensuring defense protocols established after the beast's defeat were maintained without degradation. Yet beneath this apparent effectiveness lay fundamental distortions of imperial principles. The rule of law, however inconsistently applied in previous eras, gave way to governance by direct threat. Planetary officials implemented directives without question, knowing that hesitation or modification might bring assassin teams rather than administrative censure. Religious expression became increasingly circumscribed as Vangorich, distrustful of ecclesiarchy influence, restricted public ceremonies, and limited the construction of new cathedral complexes. Most concerning was the systematic falsification of historical records regarding the War of the Beast itself. Under Vangorich's direction, Vannis Temple archivists modified official accounts to minimize the threat's magnitude, presenting the conflict as a significant but conventional Ork uprising rather than an existential crisis that had nearly destroyed the Imperium. The attack moons, the beast's unprecedented tactical sophistication, and the desperate alliance with Iron Warrior's elements were systematically excised from public records, replaced with sanitized narratives emphasizing imperial resilience rather than vulnerability. This historical revision served multiple purposes. It protected imperial morale by concealing how close humanity had come to defeat against a Xenos enemy. It preserved institutional credibility by hiding the catastrophic failures of leadership that had characterized the war's early phases. Most importantly for Vangorich, it justified his ongoing authoritarian governance by presenting the conflict's successful resolution as the result of centralized decision-making rather than the desperate improvisations of field commanders operating beyond traditional command structures. The Assassin's Regency finally ended in the 646th year of the 32nd millennium, when a combined force of Astartes from the Imperial Fists, Halo Brethren, and Sable Swords chapters assaulted the Assassinorum's primary fortress on Terra. The exact circumstances that prompted this intervention remain disputed in surviving records, with some sources suggesting a direct appeal from the Adeptus Custodes, while others indicate the chapters acted on their own initiative after identifying patterns in Vangorich's governance that threatened fundamental imperial institutions. Regardless of its origins, the assault succeeded despite horrific casualties among the attacking Marines. Vangorich died in the operation's final phase, reportedly killed by Thane himself in single combat, though some accounts suggest a Culexus assassin turned against his master in the conflict's closing moments. With Vangorich's death, the direct rule of the Assassinorum collapsed, allowing gradual restoration of traditional imperial governance structures. The War of the Beast's long-term legacy extended far beyond these immediate political consequences. The conflict fundamentally altered imperial understanding of the Ork species, transforming them in strategic doctrine from disorganized barbarians into a potential civilization-ending threat. The Death Watch's ongoing monitoring programs, established in the war's aftermath, maintained heightened vigilance against signs of similar Ork evolution anywhere in Imperial space, with standing orders to eliminate potential beast-class leaders before they could achieve full development. This vigilance proved justified as subsequent millennia witnessed periodic emergences of advanced Ork empire building. The greenskin threat would evolve again and again throughout Imperial history, with warlords like Gozkul Thraka displaying organizational capabilities reminiscent of the beast, though none would achieve the same technological sophistication until the emergence of the Prime Orks in the late 41st millennium. Each such emergence triggered immediate implementation of containment protocols developed directly from the War of the Beast experience, preventing these threats from achieving the momentum that had made the original beast so devastating. The military reforms implemented following the conflict similarly influenced Imperial doctrine for thousands of years afterward. The Last Wall Protocol became the template for regional defense arrangements throughout Imperial space, with gene lines from other Primarchs establishing their own coordination mechanisms based on the Dorn successor's model. The Death Watch's operational structure, drawing specialists from multiple chapters for specific mission requirements, influenced the development of other specialized Imperial task forces, creating precedent for cross-organizational cooperation that partially mitigated the institutional fragmentation characterizing post-heresy Imperial military structures. Perhaps most significant was the psychological impact on Imperial institutional memory. Though Vangorich's historical revisionism succeeded in obscuring many details of the conflict from public knowledge, the core lesson remained embedded in strategic doctrine. No enemy, regardless of previous assessment, should be dismissed as incapable of evolutionary adaptation. This principle, applied inconsistently but persistently throughout subsequent millennia, created institutional receptiveness to intelligence regarding emerging threats that might otherwise have been dismissed as implausible based on historical precedent. When the Tyranid hive fleets first appeared at the galaxy's edge, when the Necron tomb worlds began awakening from their ancient slumber, when the Tiao Empire expanded from a single system to a multi-sector power, in each case, Imperial response proved more rapid and comprehensive than might have occurred without the institutional memory of how quickly an underestimated Xenos species could evolve into an existential threat. The Beast had taught the Imperium a lesson written in the blood of billions, a lesson preserved not just in classified strategic assessments, but in the fundamental organizational structures established in the conflict's aftermath. As the 41st millennium drew to its tumultuous close, and the 42nd began with the return of a Primarch and the emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum, these ancient contingency plans and institutional adaptations would prove crucial to the Imperium's survival. The Beast Wars of M41, while fought against Ork forces far from Terra, triggered implementation of defense protocols first established after the original conflict, demonstrating how thoroughly the War of the Beast had shaped Imperial military doctrine across 10,000 years of history. The Imperium survived the Beast through desperate improvisation, unprecedented alliance, and terrible sacrifice. It would continue to survive subsequent threats through institutions and doctrines forged in that crucible, carrying forward the hard-won wisdom that had cost Corland his life and nearly cost humanity its future. In this way, the War of the Beast achieved a form of immortality, not through Vangorich's falsified histories, but through the living institutional memory of an Imperium that had learned, at terrible cost, never to underestimate the evolutionary potential of its enemies.